Well, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you so much for your patience. It's now 6 minutes after 8 Eastern Standard Time. And just wanted to say good morning or good afternoon, excellencies, distinguished speakers and participants in Monrovia, Brussels, Atlanta, Boston, and other places throughout the world. We are so delighted to have you participate in this important 2 day workshop on human trafficking, trapped in transit, for those working in the transportation, travel, and tourism industries. The goal of the workshops will be to make it possible for workers at all levels to recognize the signs of human trafficking, how to respond and report, as well as understand how everyone can help end human trafficking in Liberia. My name is Cynthia Blandford, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the honorary consul for the Republic of Liberia in Atlanta, Georgia, since 2009, and the president and board chair of the University Consortium for Liberia in Atlanta, Georgia. You are most welcome. Today, I have the pleasure of co-hosting the 2 day virtual human trafficking workshop with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Layli Mapayan, who I've known for over 10 years. She serves as the executive director for Wellesley Centers for Women, and she's an outstanding leader. Thank you, Lady and Wellesley Center for Women, for your leadership and support in working with the University Consortium for Liberia Board of Directors, of which you are also a member and a founding partner, to apply successfully for this grant. You are appreciated at the highest level for your outstanding work. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our incredible and distinguished speakers, who I will introduce according to the planned agenda, which you should all have with you by now. You are in for a treat as they share their expertise and provide solutions and recommendations in the fight against human trafficking in Liberia. I'm also pleased to welcome our partners, our US partners. As I mentioned, we have members from the University Consortium for Liberia board members joining us today, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, our local implementing partners in Liberia, the University of Liberia, the Liberian Airport Authority, LAA, and our international partner, Brussels Airlines, both at the corporate level and the country level in Monrovia. You are most welcome. We've also had the pleasure to engage Liberians in the diaspora, tourism experts in Monrovia, and with the intervention and engagement of the Carter Center, located here in Atlanta, Georgia, but they also have an office in Monrovia. Thanks to their leadership, we also have members of the National Council of Chiefs and Elders, the Motorcycle Transport Union, Wangosal, FL, the Liberian National Bar Association, NAMOTE, Federation of Liberian Youth, and the Press Union of Liberia participating today. You are also most welcome. Last but certainly not least, these workshops would not be possible without the funding support of the United States Department of State, U.S. Embassy Monrovia, Public Affairs Section Annual Program Grant. We appreciate your confidence in our team to help bring awareness and solutions to human trafficking in Liberia. A special thanks and appreciation to my new dear friend, His Excellency Michael McCarthy, U.S. Ambassador to Liberia in Monrovia, for his ongoing leadership and support. So let's get started. Human trafficking is a human rights concern that is also closely tied to issues of sexual and gender-based violence, GBV, two priority themes of Public Affairs Section in Monrovia between 2020 and 2021. Liberia's ranking in the US State Department's Trafficking in Persons report declined, unfortunately, from level 2 to level 2 watch list. For some time, Liberia's human trafficking statistics have been an impediment at the United Nations level and with other gatekeeping organizations, and they have also put a damper on business development and private sector investment in Liberia. Mindful that the government of Liberia has taken recent strides to address trafficking by forming an interagency commission, we believe that concerted efforts by an ever-enlarging set of diverse stakeholders, both local, national, and international, to address trafficking will help curb the tide of this form of violence, most commonly affecting women and children, especially the most economically vulnerable. Our plan is to work together, pooling our considerable and distinct resources from university, community, and private sector partners to help reduce sexual and gender-based violence in Liberia. Welcome and many thanks again for your participation. And at this time, I would like to turn the program over to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Layli Mapiling, to bring a welcome and opening remarks. Layli?
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. As Cynthia said, I'm Layli Mapiling, Executive Director of the Wellesley Centers for Women and also a Professor of Africana Studies at Wellesley College in the greater Boston area of the United States. It's my pleasure and privilege to also welcome you to today's workshop. When the U.S. Embassy Monrovia issued an opportunity to support projects that address gender-based violence in Liberia, the University Consortium for Liberia, which my institute, the Wellesley Centers for Women, is a member, as Cynthia mentioned, we knew we had to jump on it. For over a decade, gender issues in Liberia have been a key area of focus for both the University Consortium for Liberia and the Wellesley Centers for Women. Since the beginning of Cynthia's and my collaboration at the International Women's Colloquium in Liberia in 2009. Our joint mission has been to offer able partnership to those in Liberia working on women's and gender issues in any area of endeavor. When we discovered that trafficking had emerged as a renewed concern based on the July 2021 Trafficking in Persons report published by the U.S. Department of State, we knew we'd found our issue for the next phase of our work. I'd like to add my thanks to the U.S. Embassy Monrovia for getting behind this work with their support. The purpose of today's workshop is to convene many people who have the ability to do something about trafficking. It was the most logical thing in the world to start with the transportation, travel, and tourism sector because trafficking is about movement, the movement of people from one location to another for the purposes of exploitation. As we know, much trafficking utilizes transportation, relies upon travel, and hides under the cover of tourism to achieve its purposes. Thus, it is a site at which to intervene and stop trafficking in its tracks. Yet, trafficking also has cultural and site-specific dimensions. We need to take these into account so that we don't risk failure through one-size-fits-all approaches. Rather, we need culturally nuanced and culturally respectful approaches rooted in cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration. What we hope is that everyone will learn something today, as we have many kinds of experts and many kinds of attendees. What connects us is our common relationship to the movement of people and the ways in which we work together to make that a positive rather than a negative experience. Together, we can learn to recognize trafficking, take action to stop it, and ultimately eradicate trafficking. That's why we're here today and tomorrow. Now, just a reminder that this workshop is being recorded on both days in order to create an educational resource that can be used over time by many people. And we'll share the link with all participants when it's ready. We really want the opportunity to capture the important speakers and valuable information that will be shared on both days. I now want to take a few moments to go over today's program so that those of you who are participating have a sense of what to expect. This roughly 4-hour workshop will have the same format on both days. We're going to begin with an opening session, opening remarks by high-level speakers who are going to introduce us to the topic and give us a landscape view of the problem. We'll then move into sessions by transportation partners and research experts who are going to drill down on important information about trafficking, how to recognize it, how to stop it, and how to think about it as we all work together to end trafficking. Following that, we will have a session in which we present other high-level speakers to round us out and give us a closing charge each day. So expect something similar today and tomorrow with different speakers to flesh out the program. And as Cynthia mentioned, we'll introduce each speaker in turn in the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cynthia to introduce today's first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Layli, for that high-level overview. And again, thank you very much for your ongoing leadership and support and that of Wellesley Center for Women. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would like to introduce a colleague and partner of mine, and also in particular, a partner in our sister airport agreement between Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport and the Liberian Airport Authority, Mr. Michael Smith. I was delighted to host the Atlanta Airport leadership in Liberia last year, Alreen Richards-Barr, Elliot Page in particular, to join me in Liberia for our sister airport technical team meeting. We conducted training and also discussed human trafficking as it was discussed as a priority area of need. Mr. Michael Smith, as a leader participating in North America's busiest and most efficient airport, Michael L. Smith is the Airport Senior Deputy General Manager. He manages the department's day-to-day functions, including commercial operations, marketing, communications, public affairs, business diversity, law, human resources, procurement, etc. Mr. Smith has nearly 2 decades of municipal government experience, having served 17 years with the City of Atlanta as a senior assistant city attorney. During that time, he practiced all aspects of local government law, including litigation, contracts, etc. He also served as Atlanta's lead counsel representing the Department of Aviation and was responsible for negotiating agreements related to airlines and other airport tenants. Before joining Hartsfield-Jackson, Mr. Smith was a private practice attorney specializing in local government law, airport, and aviation matters. Mr. Smith began his legal career as a law clerk working for the Honorable Clarence Cooper here in Atlanta, Georgia. He is an Atlanta native. He has a degree in political science from Duke University and a law degree from North Carolina Central University. Please help me welcome Mr. Michael Smith. Michael?
Good morning, and thank you, Cynthia, and good afternoon to some. Thank you for allowing me to join you for the opening session of one of the most essential workshops we've taken part in this year. Every life on this planet is precious. Human trafficking devalues that life. That's why this Combating Human Trafficking in Transportation, Travel and Tourism in Liberia workshop matters, as we all put forth our best effort to put an end to this practice. Human trafficking may be too kind of a term for this $150 billion industry. It has been called modern day slavery, and it continues to devastate lives around the world. At Hartsfield-Jackson, the world's busiest airport, we remain committed to stopping those who traffic men, women, and children in our backyard. Our commitment began back in November 2016, when we held our first stakeholder forum. We are no less invested now as we continue our efforts to prevent human trafficking, not just in Atlanta, but around the globe. In 2017, Atlanta became the first airport in the world to sign a pledge to the Tourism Child Protection Code of Conduct, an action plan to end the sexual exploitation of children. Because we touch so many travelers globally and have the influence to do so, we leverage that to protect the lives of potential victims through our staff's continual awareness training and our messaging to hundreds of thousands of passengers who pass through Atlanta every day. By now, if you've been in our facility, you've heard our public service announcement urging everyone to stop the practice of human trafficking. And if you see something, say something. Airports nationally reach out to Hartsfield-Jackson, our team, for copies of our program so that they can activate a human trafficking awareness program at their respective facilities. So our airport is not only making a difference in Georgia, but across the nation. The efforts of our Atlanta team and our partners are effective. To date, there have been no known cases of human trafficking at our airport, and we plan to keep it that way. So events like this are vitally important as they keep us aware of the signs of human trafficking and its dangers. We look forward to hearing our distinguished guests on this program and to speak about their role in this fight. In closing, I say we're honored to be part of this workshop and hope that the information that will be shared and discussed over the next 2 days will move us forward in our fight against human trafficking. So I thank you for allowing us to join us today. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm so excited to have you join us today and excited for the leadership that Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport continues to provide in this human trafficking space. So thank you to you and your team for your outstanding efforts. At
You're
this
welcome.
time, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Honorable Joel Mayberry. He currently serves as the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Monrovia, Liberia. He has been assigned to many important roles throughout the world. And in one of his previous assignments, he was a senior advisor and director of operation in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State. Honorable Mayberry was formerly deputy director in the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, where he oversaw the Office International Programs Team and Resource Management and Planning Team. He had a distinguished career, as I mentioned, throughout the globe. Honorable Mayberry attended the National Defense University's Eisenhower School, where he received an MS in International Resource Strategy. He has received numerous department awards, including the Secretary's Award for Public Outreach for his public diplomacy and political engagement with different Muslim communities, and Superior Honor and Meritorious Honor Awards. He holds a BA in International Relations and French Literature from the University of California. Please help me to welcome Honorable Mayberry. Honorable.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Cynthia, and happy Thanksgiving from Liberia to everybody on this call. Liberians today are celebrating Thanksgiving, and it's really wonderful to be in that atmosphere. So I wanted to begin by acknowledging the organizers and by greeting all of you for this two-day workshop. The United States government is really proud to be a supporter of this event, and we cannot overemphasize how important the issue of human trafficking is and how critical it is for all of us, governments, civil society, the private sector, to make concerted long-term efforts, short-term efforts to combat this scourge. I come to you today not only as the Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Monrovia, and I do send greetings from Ambassador McCarthy, by the way, but also as a career Foreign Service officer who has worked directly, as Cynthia noted, in the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, known as the TIP office. This has been one of the most important issues in my career, and I'm glad to be part of our wider efforts in Liberia. During my time in the TIP office, I learned about the ways that airlines, airports, and others in the travel industry contribute to the fight against modern-day slavery. As a diplomat, I spent a lot of time in the air, and in conversations with flight attendants, I've often been impressed by their knowledge and passion on this issue, as well as their ability to identify suspicious patterns that might indicate trafficking. In addition to their many other duties and challenges, it is clear to me that they take their role as possible TIP first responders very seriously. We should applaud them. The government of Liberia, like most governments around the world, has acknowledged the existence of human trafficking both on its territory and beyond its national borders. Liberia's international commitments, including its 2004 accession to the Palermo Protocol, and especially its recently amended anti-trafficking law, leave no doubt about this. Let me quote the preamble of Liberia's newly amended law to ban trafficking in persons within the Republic. Whereas human trafficking anywhere in the world must be considered modern-day slavery and a threat to all nations, it also constitutes multiple grave human rights abuses that promotes the breakdown of families and communities, fuels organized crime, deprives countries of human capital and revenues and resources, undermines public health, creates opportunities for extortion and subversion among government officials, and imposes large economic costs on nations. The preamble continues. Human trafficking in both the public and private sectors of the Liberian society contribute to undermine the institutional framework for good governance, and as a consequence, has hampered sustainable socio-political tranquility and retarded economic development and growth. My friends, that is Liberia's voice, Liberia's commitment. As with many challenges that our governments face, it is imperative that we demonstrate our commitment with actions, with sustained government efforts. It is not just good enough to adopt the law must also be fully implemented. Let me talk about human trafficking in Liberia, and I will use the US Department of State's 2021 Trafficking in Persons report issued last July as my reference. The TIP report is the US government's principal diplomatic and diagnostic tool to guide relations with foreign governments on human trafficking. It is also the world's most comprehensive resource of government anti-trafficking efforts and reflects the US government's commitment to global leadership on this key human rights, law enforcement, and national security issue. This 2021 TIP report includes narratives for 188 countries and territories, including the United States. As noted in the country report for Liberia, as reported over the past 5 years, human traffickers exploit domestic and foreign victims in Liberia, and traffickers exploit victims from Liberia abroad. Trafficking within the country is more prevalent than transnational trafficking, and the majority of victims are children. Traffickers recruit and exploit most victims within the country's borders in domestic servitude, forced begging, sex trafficking, or forced labor in street vending, gold and alluvial diamond mines, and on small-scale rubber plantations. Traffickers typically operate independently and are commonly family members who promise poor relatives a better life for their children or promise young women a better life for themselves, take the children or women to urban areas, and subsequently exploit them in forced labor in street vending, domestic service, or sex trafficking. Traffickers are also often well-respected community members who exploit the quote-unquote foster care system common across West Africa. Traffickers exploit orphan children in street vending and child sex trafficking. Liberian nationals, and to a lesser extent foreigners, exploit children in sex trafficking in Monrovia. Traffickers exploited a small number of Liberian men, women, and children in other West African countries, including Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mauritania, Nigeria, Senegal, and Sierra Leone. Again, I just quoted you from our report issued last July. The report determined that the government of Liberia did not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of human trafficking, the requirement for a country to be ranked as Tier 1. But it is making efforts to do so. These efforts included opening a new shelter for child trafficking victims, initiating an investigation into a high-profile labor trafficking case in cooperation with foreign governments, and allocating funding to NGOs to conduct awareness-raising campaigns. However, the government did not demonstrate overall increasing efforts compared to the previous reporting period, even considering the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on its anti-trafficking capacity. The government identified fewer victims, initiated fewer investigations, prosecuted fewer defendants, and did not sentence any traffickers. Law enforcement officials still lack adequate resources and understanding of human trafficking to effectively investigate and prosecute trafficking crimes. Shelter services for victims remained insufficient, and the government did not provide support for non-governmental organizations caring for victims. For these reasons, Liberia was downgraded to the Tier 2 watch list. If possible, you will look at a map now of the Africa region on your screen, and you will see the different tier rankings of countries in Africa. And just as a guide, green is Tier 1, yellow is Tier 2, Orange is tier 2 watch list, and you can see Liberia in that category. I guess that's a burgundy or brown is tier 3, and then blue in the case of Somalia is a special case. Let's leave that slide up just for another minute or so people can appreciate what's going on across the Africa region, which you will note does not include the Maghreb. As we do every year when the Trafficking in Persons report is released to the public, diplomats at the U.S. Embassy in Monrovia meet with government officials, the media, and civil society organizations to review our assessment, including the tier ranking, and to discuss the all-important prioritized recommendations. Just so everyone is clear in this workshop, because I believe it bears repeating, the annual report compares a government's efforts from year to year with the, quote, minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking, quote, in the areas of prosecution, protection, and prevention as the basis of our assessment. The TIP report determines tier rankings on the U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, otherwise known as TVPA, minimum standards, which closely track with the United Nations Palermo protocols. Let's now take a look at the slide that explains the difference between the tiers. Again, tier 1, 2, tier 2 watch list, and tier 3. While we're waiting for that slide to come up. Tier 1 is for those countries whose governments fully meet the TVPA's minimum standard for the elimination of trafficking. You can see that on the screen. Tier 2 is for those countries whose governments do not fully meet the TVPA's minimum standards, but are making significant efforts to bring themselves into compliance with those standards. That's where Liberia was last year. Tier 2 watch list is for those countries whose governments do not fully meet the TVPA's minimum standards, but are making significant efforts to bring themselves into compliance with those standards. Tier 3 is for those countries whose governments do not fully meet the minimum standard for the elimination of trafficking and are not making significant efforts to do so. And they may then face restrictions in the form of sanctions on non-humanitarian assistance, subject to the President of the United States' approval. It is important to note that countries ranked tier 2 watch list for 2 consecutive years may face an automatic downgrade to tier 3 if they do not make significant efforts to meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking. Again, our approach after we have issued the annual report is to meet with appropriate government officials and go over the prioritized recommendations specific to their country. These prioritized recommendations are crafted on the basis of our understanding of where a given government can make genuine efforts to improve how it prevents human trafficking, how it protects individuals from falling prey to human traffickers, and how the government prosecutes those actors who commit the crime. I should note that this discussion about recommended actions does not have to begin at the time the annual report is published. In fact, the best practice is a year-round engagement, and our Liberian partners know this. That year-round engagement involves regular check-ins with law enforcement authorities, political leaders, civil society, and the private sector that culminates with our embassies collecting data and anecdotes from as many sources as possible so that we can analyze the situation and prepare our annual report. If you're wondering, the reporting period each year begins on April 1st and ends on March 31st. In other words, we give a government every opportunity to demonstrate that it is taking actions, that it's making significant efforts to prevent, protect, and prosecute. It's nice to remember that 3 Ps paradigm. And again, in the case of Liberia, just as in every other country around the world, March 31st, 2022 will mark the end of the current reporting period. And it's before then, and certainly no later than that date, that we would hope to have all the data, all the anecdotes available so that we can begin our narrative and our analysis to prepare the next report that will be due in late June, early July of 2022. As I like to say in my meetings with Liberian government officials, if they are taking the TIP report to heart, and I know they are, and that they're devoting the necessary resources to the effort, then they have a good news story to tell. And the United States Annual Report is a highly respected vehicle for helping tell that good news. So let's now take a look at the prioritized recommendations for Liberia. Next slide, please. I'll begin talking about many of these, and you'll see the effect of the slide will give you an idea that we mean business. And we sit down with our Liberian interlocutors, and this is what we discuss. I don't expect you to read all that real quickly, but it gives you an idea of the seriousness with which we tackle these issues. And across the world, we come up with prioritized recommendations for every country. We see increased efforts to investigate and prosecute trafficking cases, including internal trafficking cases and officials accused of complicity. Training law enforcement and judicial officials on identifying, investigating, and prosecuting cases under the 2005 anti-trafficking law, now an amended law. Listen to this one. Amend the 2005 anti-trafficking law to remove the requirement of force, fraud, or coercion in child sex trafficking cases. And this one. Amend the 2005 anti-trafficking law to prescribe penalties for adult trafficking that are sufficiently stringent and commensurate with the penalties for other grave crimes. Expand victim services, particularly for victims outside the capital, males, and victims requiring long-term care. Increase financial or in-kind support to NGOs that support trafficking victims. Train law enforcement, labor inspectors, immigration officials, and social workers on standard victim identification procedures and the national referral mechanism. Allocate financial and in-kind resources as feasible to the anti-trafficking task force. Increase labor inspections in the informal sector and mining regions to improve identification of trafficking cases, including child forced labor. Increase efforts to raise public awareness of human trafficking, including internal trafficking, and so on. We are 7 months into the reporting period that will be considered as part of the 2022 Trafficking in Persons report, as I noted earlier. First of all, let me say this, and be very clear about it. The United States applauds the government of Liberia for amending the 2005 anti-trafficking law. Its anti-trafficking law. This was accomplished on October 1st. That is a major accomplishment that involved the different branches of Liberia's government and the United States diplomatic engagement. Thank you, Liberia. Also, the Ministry of Labor has contracted 10 non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations to conduct a 15-county 3-month awareness raising program, or campaign rather, on the new TIP law until December 31st. Again, thank you, Ministry of Labor. In addition, the Ministry of Finance has allocated $100,000 towards anti-TIP and child labor efforts. Thank you, Ministry of Finance. We also commend civil society organizations for their active involvement in reporting potential trafficking cases and coordinating services for potential victims. Let me just name a few: the Liberia Association of Female Sociologists, Community Watch Forum, the Defense for Children International, the National Concerned Youth of Liberia, Orphan Relief and Rescue, World Hope International, and YWCA Liberia. Although progress in combating human trafficking must be led by the government of Liberia in partnership with civil society, the U.S. Embassy remains committed to providing appropriate support. For example, with funding from the Department of State Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, the International Development Law Organization has developed TIP curricula for the Liberian law enforcement and judicial sectors, including a bench book for judges, a handbook for prosecutors, and training for law enforcement officers. These are terrific resources. The government of Liberia has joined IDLO, the International Development Law Organization, in trainings for more than 200 prosecutors, judges, and other judicial actors. USAID has also worked with the Ministry of Labor and the TIP Secretariat here in Liberia to raise awareness of TIP and how to report suspected trafficking. For example, through a program implemented by Catholic Relief Services, rural residents of Nimba and Montserrado counties met with local leaders and government of Liberia officials to raise awareness of what human trafficking is, how it impacts communities, and what community members and local authorities can do to prevent trafficking. Finally, I want to emphasize a point that my colleagues and I have made in our meetings with Liberian government officials. And I know those government officials are smiling right now because they know exactly what I'm about to say. This fight that you're in, the fight to ban modern slavery, is a worthy one, but it requires the stamina of a marathon runner. While it is laudable to have sprinters make certain efforts in a given year, please, please do not rest on your laurels. All of us who are engaged in this endeavor must demonstrate political will and commit the necessary resource to keep combating the scourge year after year. Thank you all, and may the rest of this workshop lead to greater public awareness, greater government action, and greater collaboration with the private sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Joel. We really appreciate your outstanding performance today, giving us information, tips and tools, the challenges that we are faced with in terms of the human trafficking issues facing the Republic of Liberia. We are so honored to have you as one of our strategic partners and stakeholders in this space. And we look forward to working with you in the months and years ahead. So thank you very much, and please our best regards to Ambassador McCarthy. Thank you. At this time, I believe Dr. Mapayan, I think we're going right into our 9 o'clock session. Is that correct? Yes. Transportation.
We have a few minutes before our 9 o'clock session begins, and I was really hoping that both Michael and Joel would be willing to engage in a little bit of Q&A. I know that one of the most important aspects of this workshop is the opportunity to go deeper on the topics that were raised in the presentations. And I think that I would like to ask a few questions. We haven't had audience questions come in yet because I haven't yet asked for them, but I would just like to offer a few questions that I thought of while I was listening to these two presentations. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, great. One of the first questions I had will be to you, Michael, since you spoke first. It was wonderful to hear about the leadership that Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport has given to the wider airport industry and sector with regard to seeing something and saying something about trafficking. And I'm wondering how we might make a pitch to other airports, whether in Liberia or elsewhere, about how to get on board with the best practices that ATL has identified. How can we get more airports involved, and what are specifically some of those best practices that airports should be thinking about?
Well, thank you, Lily. I believe that participation in all of our industry organizations, whether it be ACI, ACI World, locally, AAE or IOTA, to get those organizations to let other airports know what we're doing, to encourage more participation in the seminars or webinars that each one of them holds, that it be a ongoing topic in many of those areas. Best practices, we've got, two individuals here at the airport who are always out and available to go out and speak and talk about what we're doing, about seeing something, saying something, and training programs. You'll hear from Myrna White, I think, a little bit later, and she'll really kind of detail what some of our efforts have been. But I think always encouraging and keeping this topic at the forefront of any meetings that you might have would be critical.
Thank you. And we are very much looking forward to that presentation by Myrna that will detail some of the things that have taken place at ATL. So thank you very much, because I know that we really want to inspire other airports with this workshop to go to the next level, whatever that next level is for them. Joe, I wanted to ask you this question. You talked a little bit about the factors that have influenced the movement of countries between tier 2 and tier 2 watch list. Obviously, we want to turn the wheels in the other direction. And you talked about the role of partnership in helping us do that. I really appreciated the list of prioritized recommendations that you gave. And I was wondering if you could identify the most important emerging areas for partnership where people on this call might be thinking, how can I be part of that?
Thank you for that excellent question, Levi. And I think what's important to remember is there is a list of recommendations, of prioritized recommendations. In many countries, there have been no prosecutions for an entire year. There have been no prosecutions in some cases for several years. And when a government begins to take prosecutions seriously, and we understand the role of prosecutions and the follow-on conviction and eventually a sentencing per the law of that country, we also then can appreciate what sort of deterrent effect it can have. So the partnership there is really encouraging the government to implement its law fully. The law is stronger. The Liberian law is stronger, and that's why we applaud Liberia for taking that important step. Now what? I've spoken to senior government ministers and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Minister of Justice, Minister of Labor, Minister of Gender, and on. What now? What resources will the government of Liberia bring to bear? Not U.S. government resources that are going to get credit for the Liberian government. Let's underscore the importance of the TIP report giving credit to governments for their role in these things. So the private sector can certainly help. International donors, the United States and others, can certainly help and guide and encourage. But at the end of the day, what's important? What's the budget line in the national budget devoted to awareness raising, devoted to building up the courts, training up prosecutors, making sure that everybody in law enforcement knows how to identify a trafficking victim or trafficking perpetrator? That's how I think we can best talk about working together. Again, it's not one thing. And the mistake when I was referring to sprinters and marathon runners is it's not a mistake as such. It's just we say focus on as many of these different recommendations as possible, understanding that some probably are weighted more heavily. Our colleagues at the Office of Monitor and Combat Trafficking Persons in Washington will be looking at that. Are there any prosecutions? Have there been any prosecutions in recent years? And are they trending up? Or is there a plateau, or are they trending down compared to not only the previous year, but we you heard my remarks about sort of a moving 5-year period. This is also important. And some of the descriptions of the trafficking situation in Liberia also reflect that five-year period, as we do in every country. So what we hope is that governments and countries will overcome or help make some of those trafficking conditions disappear, and they will fall off the trafficking in persons report. But if something happened 2 years ago and it's still there this year, it may be because there's no evidence of it right now, but we're concerned that it might reemerge if serious steps aren't taken to address it. I hope that helps answer the question.
That does help a lot. And, you know, I'm sure that one thing that many members of our audience could be wondering is whether the COVID pandemic has had any impact on trafficking, the activities of trafficking and traffickers, and also on efforts to combat it. And I'm sure that both Bill and Michael, you have thoughts about that.
Well, I would say that the pandemic did, of course, slow traffic. So there may have been some slowing of some international movement as countries closed and have opened. Domestically, I know the U.S. traffic has been drastically picking up. And of course, we always have major events in the country in which we have unfortunate opportunity for human trafficking or sex trafficking to take place. So that just means that even in spite of a pandemic, that these efforts have to continue, and that there may not be any slack in the awareness, in the training, and in the efforts to stop it.
Lately, I would agree with what Michael just said. The pandemic has been a worldwide pandemic, and governments across the world, the United States, Liberia, have faced serious resource implications from the pandemic. That, I would say, doesn't excuse any of us from letting down our vigilance, letting down our guard. We need to remain vigilant. We need to continue this fight. So I think the pandemic is something that we also don't want to ignore in the area of sexual and gender-based violence. I would simply add that the pandemic has definitely had an impact. We see numbers rising across the world of numbers of persons who are victims of sexual and gender-based violence. One of these cross-cutting issues that we're monitoring as well.
All right, I noticed that we're actually getting a couple of questions from the audience, and here's one. Eddie Jarwolo asks, he says, as a civil society leader working with thousands of young people across Africa, how can I help in creating awareness of the human trafficking issue? He says both presentations were great and eye-opening to increase intervention, but he's looking for tips to help as he works with young people.
Maybe I'll start with that one. First of all, congratulations for the person's commitment and willingness to engage. I think that's already recognition. It already means that someone is aware of the issue and wants to engage. And what I would encourage is, if you're a member of a civil society organization, community-based organization, is do the work that you believe needs to be done. Do your best to engage with the government, because for the purposes of the Trafficking in Persons report, your organization will get credit, but it won't be the credit that the government would like to get in order to raise a country off of a particular tier ranking, or at least stay at the tier ranking where it is, if it's, let's say, in tier 1. But civil society plays an enormous role, and we shouldn't ignore that. And so governments, and I'm speaking to the government of Liberia in this case, should look to its partners in civil society. And if the government doesn't have the wherewithal, maybe it's got a lot of other parties, in addition to fighting trafficking persons, and use those non-governmental organizations, those civil society organizations, give them resources to help them partner with the government in combating this crime.
Right. I know we're getting short on time, but we do have a question from Lena Wright. Lena, you might want to say your question verbally because I haven't seen it in the Q&A box. So you could perhaps come off mute and ask your question. We can answer it in the minute that we have left. Lena, go ahead and if you can take yourself off mute and ask your question. Lena, I think you're still on mute. If you don't mind, try unmuting yourself again. I'm not sure why she's not coming off mute, but I think that I'd like to invite Lena to enter her question to the Q&A box, and maybe we'll get to it later in the session today. So I want to thank both Michael Smith and Joel Maybury for those excellent presentations that have kicked off this workshop on a very high note, offering us valuable information that sets the tone for the rest of the day. And I'd now like to turn it back over to Cynthia to introduce our next presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael and Joel, for the outstanding performance and for the tools and tips that will help to help Liberia get off of this unfortunate watch list. So we appreciate you. We look forward to working with you. This is a wonderful time right now for me to introduce to you. This is now what we're calling session 2, transportation partner presentation and group discussion. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored and pleased to open session 2 in our workshop that will help focus on our transportation partner and the great work they have done in the human trafficking space. Some of it you've already heard from Michael Smith, but you'll hear a much broader presentation today. And so it's my distinct honor to introduce to you my good friend, Myrna White, who is the Assistant General Manager, Office of Public and International Affairs at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The Department of Aviation veteran, Myrna, oversees policy and communications, public relations, government affairs, conferences and special events, community affairs and international affairs at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the most efficient and effective airport in the world, right here in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. Myrna was initially hired to win jurisdictional approvals needed to build the 5th runway at Hartsfield-Jackson. She has proven her leadership throughout her tenure at the airport. Before being named Director of Public Affairs, she served as the airport's Government Affairs Manager. She recently led the development and implementation of a series of consumer confidence briefings for key airport stakeholders, demonstrating the airport's readiness for a full resumption of operations during this COVID experience. She has received resolutions from both the Georgia House and Senate commending her for her leadership. Myrna has chaired the Marketing and Communications Committee for Airport Council International's North American region, in addition to serving on the board of directors for several area chambers of commerce. She also recently earned the 2021 Pinnacle Leadership Award from the Airport Minority Advisory Council. Ms. White is a graduate of Leadership Fayette, Leadership Clayton, and the Regional Leadership Institute. She's also a graduate of the University of Georgia School of Journalism. My dear friend, Ms. Myrna White, we turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Honorary Consul. It is a pleasure to be with all of you, and I want to commend the university, the consortium, the sponsors, all the organizers who are a part of putting on this very important forum. We also are very appreciative for all the work that Alreen Barr does as our International Affairs Director, making sure that that the airport stays involved with all international issues of importance. So I do have a presentation that I'd like to share with the group this morning, and I think the administrators have that presentation and are able to pull it up for us. All right, thank you. I know that most of you who are on the call today are already aware of the statistics, but I think that they are important enough that they bear repeating. So I want to underscore the statistics that are driving the anti-human trafficking program at the world's busiest airport. It is important for the airport, because we are a major hub of transportation, to be aware of these statistics as we are fighting this insidious crime. We know that there are about at least 12.3 million people around the world. And if we can go to the next slide, please. 12.3 million people around the world who are trapped in forced labor and human trafficking. A lot of times people think of human trafficking as having to do with sexual exploitation, which is true, but there are also other forms of human trafficking. It's forced labor that can be with a focus on organ harvesting, sexual slavery, or commercial sexual exploitation. So it is important that we educate transportation hubs such as airports and airlines so that we are not used as accomplices in this crime. We don't want our facilities to be used as a way to move human cargo. Next slide, please. Now we look at the numbers. At least 12.3 million people around the world are trapped in forced labor. In 2020, we saw it was estimated that internationally, there are between 20 million, 20 million, I think, okay. I see now that we have some numbers that were updated here. Looking at this 2020, that is not correct. That we did correct that number, and I apologize for that. There's 20 to 40 million people internationally. 71% of labor trafficking victims have come into our country through lawful visas. Now, we have found that victims experience at least one of the following. It's either fraud, force, coercion, document fraud, sexual abuse, discrimination, just a whole host of violence and threats that are used against family members as well. Next slide, please. One of the things that we think is important that we educate people so that they understand the difference between what is a myth and what is actually reality. The myth is that human trafficking and human smuggling is the same. That is not true. Trafficking is the recruiting, transporting, harboring, or receiving of a person through force to exploit him or her. Human smuggling is the transport of an individual from one destination to another, usually with his or her consent. Another myth is that movies are accurately depicting human trafficking, traffickers mostly as gangsters. The reality is that a trafficker could be anyone. We heard the gentleman earlier speak that sometimes these are the most respected people of a community. They can be politicians, law enforcement, businessmen, or restaurant owners. Another myth is that human trafficking always means prostitution. That is not true. As we mentioned earlier, it can include forced labor and even organ trade. And then finally, I think this is one of the largest myths, is that only women are trafficked. That is not so. Men and young boys are also trafficked, and not just for labor, but for sex as well. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that we like to do is share case studies so that everyone that we're working with, and consortiums like this are important. We must collaborate with law enforcement, with airlines, and there is a group called Airline Ambassadors International that works to train flight attendants on what they should look for in trafficking instances. So this particular case occurred in 2011 when an Alaska Airlines flight attendant noticed a teen girl on a flight from Seattle to San Francisco. The girl appeared to be disheveled. She was not dressed well, not well groomed, but she was sitting next to a well-dressed older man. The flight attendant noticed that this man would not let the girl speak for herself. He was always answering questions for her and that kind of thing. So the flight attendant went into the restroom and left a note for the girl. And the girl wrote back, "I need help." Now, the flight attendant was able to alert pilots, and police arrested this man. So this is a critical component of our anti-trafficking program, is to make sure that everyone who touches our customer base is trained on what to look for in the case of human trafficking. And this example is one where that training worked well and a young girl was saved. Next slide, please. Now, Hartsfield-Jackson has taken a number of steps to make sure that we are fighting this crime. So we have signage that's posted in all the restrooms here at the airport and retail spaces. Those signs include a hotline number where anyone who suspects that human trafficking is going on can call that hotline. We also have training for all employees that come through the airport or who are beginning to be employed here, are trained in a number of issues, and human trafficking is one of the most important ones. We have annual stakeholder forums where we have law enforcement who are with us. That's local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, in addition to the district attorney's office for the county in which the airport resides, and our attorney general. We bring in those experts along with human trafficking advocates. There is an organization called Youth Spark that we work with very closely. So we have these forums so that we can exchange best practices and make sure that each entity within the airport space knows exactly how to be effective in fighting this crime. We also have provided human trafficking indicators to the public so that they know what to look for, and I will share those with you in the next slide. We have public announcements that are broadcast throughout the airport public address system. We also have partnered with an organization called United Against Slavery. This is a national organization that is focusing on transportation hubs and how we can work effectively to combat human trafficking. We hold press events. You see one on the right, that at that time, that was the airport police major. That press event was to announce one of our huge summits, and we had our law enforcement organizations and other partners participating in that as well. And then we were the first airport to sign the Tourism Child Protection Code of Conduct, indicating that we are committed to fighting human trafficking and making sure that our employees are trained. And one of our really effective steps that we take is the youth forums that we hold in area schools. We partner with Youth Spark and our law enforcement with those as well. We are actually going into the schools, teaching students about what to look for with human trafficking. Sometimes students may be suspicious of what's happening with some of their friends, or they themselves may be victims of human trafficking. So in these forums, we always organize them in such a way so that the students feel they're in a safe space. They're not embarrassed, and we give them the opportunity to go and speak with a school counselor after the forum if they feel like they are being trafficked, or if they know of someone who is. And we have had several students who have come forward after we have held those particular forums. And then finally, we have an art exhibit where we're highlighting survivors of trafficking, showing their strength and just how they have been able to survive and thrive. Next slide, please. Now, these are some of the, and I know this is a lot on the screen, but we want to make sure that folks understand what it is they should be looking for. And we also stress to folks, don't be afraid of accusing someone who is not really trafficking. It is more important that you are bringing it to the attention of law enforcement if there is someone who is trafficked. It's much more important to stop trafficking from occurring than it is to be embarrassed by having someone ask by the law enforcement what their relationship is with a particular person. So the indicators are, we talked about before, someone that has clothing that is inappropriate for their particular route of travel. Someone may be showing some signs of physical abuse, like burns or scars, visible signs that you can see. A person has no identification of their own, their whatever documents they have is being held by another person rather than them having them themselves. And then I think another one that's really obvious is if there are symbols tattooed on a person's body that symbolize money or daddy, something that doesn't really match what you would expect. And then the person has no basic knowledge of their travel plans. They don't know where they're going or where they've been. Someone who is accompanied by a controlling or abusive boyfriend or travel companion. And again, it doesn't hurt to just ask. We're training folks that you don't approach a person who you suspect may be trafficking. You are alerting the right authorities who know how to handle that situation. And then if someone has excessive baggage or they have limited baggage, you can really tell for the kind of travel that they have, what looks appropriate and what does not. A person that is not able to control their own money or doesn't have money, they're always using prepaid cards such as Green Dot, Vanilla, and accompanied by an unrelated male or female. And if a person has the same address as a companion, but they're not related. And then this is another important one, if they're overstaying an international visit. Now, those are the physical indicators, but there are also behavioral indicators that we train our folks to look for. Someone who is unable or unwilling to move freely, you can tell that they're being restrained. They have to stay close to the person they're with, and that person is always watching them. Again, we talked about that person not being able to speak for themselves. And then their scripted answers, you can tell that these are answers that they've been programmed to give, and they're not deviating from that script at all. They're avoiding eye contact or any kind of social interaction and really shying away if they see any authority figures. And then this is definitely a giveaway if they're looking at a mobile device before they're responding, and showing these signs of anxiety, depression, annoyance, resistance, or belligerence toward authorities. These are signs as well. And then, of course, if someone is not being truthful about their identity or their age, if they don't know the identity of the person with whom they're traveling, and then if you hear statements like, I'm going to be in this country for an extended period, that sounds so ambivalent, no definite travel plans. And then we're always asking that folks report missing children, or if you witness activity that is suspicious. In our country, we're asking folks to dial 911 immediately. Next slide, please. So we want to know what ways that you can help. First, you want to educate yourself, learning the indicators of human trafficking that we've just gone over. And one of the a national drive to action for us is, if you see something, say something. Don't just let a situation linger because you're not certain. Alert the proper authorities if you see something suspicious. Volunteer. You can support anti-trafficking efforts in your community. There is power in numbers, and we definitely need more folks who are willing to be advocates. And engage your government. We encourage our folks to write local leaders, make sure they know, the folks that make decisions politically, let them know how important this issue is to you. And certainly partnering with other countries and airports to establish best practices, and then to share best practices with those as well. And finally, forums like these are critically important. You're able to discuss best practices among other experts, share what has worked well for you and your organization. And then if you are working to develop an anti-human trafficking program, having experts who are able to share what has been effective is very critical in establishing such a program as we have done at Hartsfield-Jackson. Next slide, please. Here is my contact information. There is I mentioned Airline Ambassadors International. That group has a website, and they are willing to assist. That website is airline AMB for ambassadors.org. I definitely suggest having airports contact that organization to get additional information about how you can train your flight attendants and other airport employees as well. So again, thank you for inviting Hartsfield-Jackson to this important forum, and I am happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Myrna, for this very, very compelling presentation about all of the things that ATL has done to advance stopping trafficking. You know, you can sort of make the statement that it takes a village to end trafficking. And what your presentation shows is how good the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport has been at creating that village. And while we're waiting for questions and comments to come in, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the evolution of the process of creating that village. I know that on one of your slides, you showed a number of your partners. I know it took time to build those partnerships. I know that you and those partners learned and grew together in this work. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about that process for others who might be interested in building their own village around this work, and also to help people think about the steps of building strong partnerships that are enduring and effective?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, our philosophy is it is important to build relationships with partners and stakeholders before you need them. So we have always worked hard to have a good relationship with our federal partners, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We also have a good relationship with the Attorney General's office for the state of Georgia, the district attorney for the county in which we reside. So we've maintained relationships with those entities already. So when we developed our human trafficking program, we brought them all together to first make them aware that we were planning to launch this program and to get their input. So it's important that you get input early on so that those partners can buy into your campaign, and then they are willing to be as supportive, as actively supportive as they can in making sure that that campaign is successful. When the Super Bowl was here, and whenever there are major sporting events, we are aware that that is when there's a higher tendency for human trafficking to attempt to prevail. So we held a huge forum, one of our largest. We had about 300 or 400 people attend that one. So we had the Attorney General, the district attorney, all of the major players, in addition to those human trafficking advocates that I mentioned earlier, like the airline ambassadors and Youth Spark. All of them came together for our forum. They presented, sharing what their particular entities were doing to combat human trafficking. And it was just a really effective forum to have all of these parties coming together. I find when you have a mutual goal, you have a mission that everyone can grasp and be passionate about, it comes easy then for that collaboration to take place.
Those are some really great points that I think anybody who's trying to do this work could take to heart and build on. I was impressed by the number of times that you mentioned youth, and I'd love to hear you say more about that, because one of the things that I know from my own research about trafficking is that youth are particularly vulnerable to trafficking because they're susceptible to offers of lucrative jobs, scholarships, athletic opportunities, and other kinds of travel that traffickers use to lure youth. Obviously, they're at a time in life when they're trying to build their adulthood. Many are trying to get out of some pretty hard circumstances, and those offers sound really good. Can you say more about your work with youth, what you've learned with youth, and what people who work with youth could learn from you?
Well, I tell you, first, we understand that it begins at home. So this training that we're doing is focused on employees, but then those employees are able to share it with their family and friends. I have a 9-year-old niece who is beautiful, and when she's out walking her little poodle, I am stressing to her that she's never to go out by herself. She's to stay away from traffic or not talk to any strangers. Now, you would think that that's a given, but it is not. Some kids can be really trusting, and it's so important for everyone to make sure they understand you are not to talk to anyone that you don't know, and you need to stay near your parents. So that's first. And then when we are in the schools, we are emphasizing and reinforcing hopefully what they've already been taught at home. But if they have not been taught at home, we are taking that advantage of making sure they are trained in what they should be looking for. Someone befriending you who you don't know, offering enticing favors, whatever they may be. It's important for us to let those youth understand that it's not appropriate, and that it's okay to tell someone. I'm sure most of you know that a lot of times traffickers will try to have secrets or tell their victims not to share it with anyone. So we make sure they know, yes, you must tell someone when that happens. So working with the schools, and then Youth Spark is the organization. I also can't stress enough how important it is to work with advocacy groups who are focused 100% on fighting human trafficking. They can bring a lot of value to your program as well.
Have you heard anyone anecdotally refer to the role of social media in trafficking? I know that's a new factor that has emerged since you've been doing this work. And I know that those people who try to approach youth by befriending them sometimes masquerade on social media. And I don't know whether in your work with youth that issue has ever come up.
Well, we know that that is certainly a problem in our country. Congress now is trying to make social media safer for younger folks because they are vulnerable. We had a news story just this week about a 9-year-old who met someone online and somehow was convinced to leave his home and ended up 2 states away. So that is certainly a problem that we address. We emphasize to folks that parents again play a huge role in not allowing very young kids to be on social media because they're really not equipped for it. So yes, that is something that we emphasize in our program as well.
Thank you for that. I'm still waiting for audience questions to come in, but I want to make a special invitation to our colleagues at the Liberia Airport Authority because I know that they are holding a group meeting. And I don't know whether there are any questions in that group and whether the person who is in charge of putting up the screen for the meeting might gather questions and put them forth to the rest of us. So I just wanted to say that out loud because I know that we have people joining, some from their own devices and some in groups. I also know we may have some people from the Carter Center who might be together. So I wanted to invite anyone. And if anyone would rather speak verbally instead of typing it into the Q&A, you can also raise your hand. And James at Icon can help identify you. Cynthia, I also don't know if Myrna's presentation inspired any questions in you because I know that you've had a lot of chances to work together and you may have thought of some things as a tourism sector expert yourself that you'd like to comment on or ask.
Well, thank you, Laylee, and thank you, Myrna. This has really been very exciting to hear the deliberations. And yes, I think from 2 perspectives. I will start from the consulate here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I have been on post since 2009, appointed by Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And now I have the pleasure and honor of serving under His Excellency George Manawia. And in this space, we also issue travel visas to Liberia. And so there's a process, as an immigration process, as Joel knows. I mean, you have it from the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Monrovia, but on this side, we're also gatekeepers. There's an application process. If you have minors who are 18 years and younger, we are required to have a birth certificate. We evaluate that birth certificate of each minor child. We also evaluate the request from the parents, which means if both parents are traveling, we still have to have a notarized letter authorizing this minor child to travel out of the country. We have the right to deny a visa based upon the data that we've collected at the interview. So we are also gatekeepers and we have a very important role to play. And we do get pushback oftentimes from the community stating that, hey, both of us are traveling, we're both parents. Well, it's a requirement. You must have a notarized letter. And for those who don't know where the father is, the paternal father or paternal mother, you have to also have a notarized letter that's stating, I don't know where he is or she is. They may be deceased, they may be divorced. That custodial parent may have the legal document stating I'm a custodial parent, and having the legal documentation of that is important. We also are finding that some parents are allowing their minor children to travel with a niece or an elder statesperson, a nephew, grandparent, we still have to have those letters authorizing minor children to travel outside of the country. So we are gatekeepers. It's a process that we have had in place since the beginning of our office being opened in 2009. And we are implementing that policy on behalf of the U.S. Department of State, also the government and the people of Liberia, to ensure that we have safe travels for minor children who are going into the country. On a secondary note, we have also engaged some of our colleagues, as we know, and it has been published in the media. We're getting ready to celebrate the 200th anniversary, the bicentennial of the Republic of Liberia. This is the return of freed men and women from America to Liberia. So the question is now, as many people are coming from all over the world to Liberia, the issue, and as Myrna was talking about sporting events and major events, how does the country get ready now for this influx of people from all over the world, the diaspora and others coming home, to make sure that when folks might be coming in from the villages, looking for ways to work and to find new opportunities to network and to make new friends, that our hotels and our transportation partners are fully informed to know what to look for. Some of those things you have referenced previously, Myrna, in your comments, and Layla, you as well. So we have with us people who are in the travel industry with us today, who are participating as they get ready for the Year of the Diaspora, making sure hotels are ready, making sure that with the Carter Center's invitations, some of our transportation folks, the Pin, the motorcycle fellows, and others who are well-informed, transportation buses are included. If you see something, say something. What is going to be the tagline? What is going to be that promotional line for our people in Liberia? It may not be see something, say something. It may not be I'm not for sale, but what is it that will help us to get a movement that will encourage and motivate people to participate in this whole notion of how to mitigate and stop human trafficking? So we do have a major role to play. We're excited to be a part of the team and clearly look forward to next steps in this work.
Those are really helpful comments, Cynthia, and thank you for talking about what your office does to also interrupt trafficking. You know, I think that the point that you raised, Myrna, about people not being anxious when they see something suspicious. But let's say a person is walking through the Atlanta airport, as I've done many times, and they do see something suspicious. For example, I can remember a time when I was in the security line waiting to go up to the official that checked my travel documents. And I saw an older white man with a younger Black woman. They didn't look like they should be a pair, but I could tell that they were traveling together. And I just wasn't sure. I was watching them for probably 30 minutes and I just wasn't sure, who should I say something to? Can you help someone who's in that situation?
Well, that's a good question. We definitely do see some unlikely pairings in the airport, but as I said before, well, first, let me answer your question. In our airport, if you dial 911 from any phone, it's going to get you to the authorities. You will share your concerns, where you are. And so within that 30 minutes that you watch that couple, the law enforcement would have had an opportunity to come to them, and they are trained as well. So they know the proper questions to ask without crossing a line. So they would have been able to handle that. And so that's what I would always suggest, because what we share with folks as we're training is that it's much, much better to be wrong and risk just being wrong than it is to allow a person to be trafficked and you had an opportunity to stop that crime from occurring. So again, you're not putting yourself in an awkward position at all. You are just advising law enforcement of what your suspicions are, and then they take it from there.
That's a very vital point, and I'm glad to know that you can call 911, presumably from your cell phone within the airport, and get a local airport security person to come check out the situation. I also know it's a very sensitive question that's on a lot of people's minds because they don't want to participate in racial profiling or anything of that nature. It can feel like a moral issue, like, oh, if I make this call, am I contributing to somebody being profiled? You know, and that's a judgment call that everyone has to make, but it can be hard because sometimes the things that make people look anomalous have to do with race, gender, how people are dressed, socioeconomic class or economic condition, even sometimes disability. And we don't want to be judgmental, but at the same time, you know, we may have questions. So that's something that I'm sure some people struggle with when they're in that situation. We've had a couple of questions come in from the audience. And so I want to put them out there. The first one, actually, they're both two questions from Veronica Bondo. Thank you, Veronica, for putting these questions in. She asked, what can one do to stop a person who's been trafficked without their knowledge? So that's, you know, we've talked about that a little bit, but let's say, you know, people may be being trafficked and they don't even really know what trafficking is, or they may think I'm doing something voluntarily, or they may think I'm not being trafficked. But if someone else notices something, you know, how can you stop it? I think that's what she's asking.
Mm-hmm. So, and then she says she's asking about from Liberia, where the justice system is weak. So what I don't know if this has already happened, but I would suggest having a meeting, a conference with the justice system, with advocates, with the honorary consul's office, a group of leaders who can make decisions and request that decisions be made, to first lay the groundwork to say, this is how we should approach tackling this issue. And if we work together, we can make a difference. So if that has happened already, then there should be a contact person. There should be a way that a person who knows of someone being trafficked can go to the particular authority to say, this is happening here and it needs to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you for answering that specifically with, you know, the Liberian context in mind. We now have another question from Francis B. Fala, supervisor of PAC Services Department at Roberts International Airport. This has to do with human trafficking indicators at the Liberia Airport Authority. We do not have a trafficking indicator providers to aid us to track down illegal traffickers. What do we do to help in the process? So I'm not sure exactly what's meant by the indicators, but I think the goal is to think about, how does this apply to LAA and to Roberts International Airport? Do you have some thoughts to share?
And I see a subsequent question is how to put something in effect at the Liberia Airport Authority. I don't want to speak for Alreen, but I'm sure that she would be willing to assist with setting up a forum specifically for the Liberia Airport, so that we can share how we developed our program, and then we can hear from you what are some of the obstacles that you face that maybe we don't face, that we could collaborate on together and hopefully, prayerfully, be able to come up with resolutions that could be effective.
And I think that, you know, potentially that could be one of the most important outcomes of this workshop, if it helped build a bridge between the Atlanta airport and the Roberts Airport or any airports in Liberia. And I think that we're in a position to help facilitate that. So thank you for, on behalf of Irene, making potentially that offer and that outreach to LAA. So at this point in time, we don't have more questions in the Q&A box, and I'm wondering if there's anyone else in the audience who would like to raise their hands and ask, or even whether any of the other panelists have questions for Myrna, because this is our real opportunity. We're going to, of course, have another airline related presentation tomorrow from Brussels Airlines. And we wanted to make sure that you were able to hear from multiple airport partners during this workshop. But to really keep the learning going, this is your opportunity to have a very important conversation. So panelists, do any of you have questions that you would like to also ask? If so, put up your hand and James can spotlight you.
Laylee, I just want to make a statement just on behalf of our sister airport partnership between LAA and Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. I know Alreen is here. I really want to give kudos to Alreen for her leadership in our visit to LAA last year. We were there as a part of a technical team to further discussions on area of support, whether it was security, whether it's human trafficking, you name it. The airport was there, Hartsfield-Jackson. So I know Alreen is here. She may want to speak to that, but this is consistent with the sister airport agreement outcomes and deliverables. So Alreen, I'd love to hear your voice, but this is very much in line, I think, with the vision that you've already stated previously.
Yes, as Myrna said, we welcome it. It's a part of the sister airport agreement. We appreciate the partnership. And I know that when I was there the last time, we did a human trafficking forum, and there were several questions. So I am so happy that Myrna just laid it out for the group that's listening in. And we will be so happy to continue this discussion. So Cynthia, please, we'll make it happen.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. Looking forward to it.
Yes, that's powerful. And I'm glad to know that that MOU is in place. We got an additional question from someone who says that nowadays, a lot of foreign schools are offering scholarships that are so low to the extent that parents are jumping at the opportunity. And they want to know if we can put a system in place where foreign school scholarships are thoroughly vetted. Obviously, that's a question that goes beyond airports per se, but we all know that these kinds of so-called opportunities are on the increase. And in fact, that young people often find out about them through advertisements on social media. And we also know that some of them aren't real and they do lead to trafficking situations. So would any of you like to address this question?
Well, I'll say I'm not aware of that particular situation, but as I'm listening to you outline it, I think a resolution would be some clearinghouse that could actually vet those scholarship opportunities to determine if they are real. I don't know if it would be something within the university system. I think that would probably be the most likely clearinghouse. And if they're from several different, if the scholarships supposedly are for several different universities, then perhaps the universities can work among themselves to determine how they can help vet those offers to determine if they are in fact legitimate.
Right, we definitely need more formal structures and ones that we can assess the credibility of who's offering them. So I like those suggestions. I just learned that Joel has raised his hand, and I'm wondering if Joel can come on camera to ask your question or to make your comment.
Yeah, I'm not sure about getting my video going, but let me just make a point and maybe help answer the last question, which is everything related to higher education, if this is from Liberia or other countries where we have embassies and American centers inside the embassy. Remember that we have education advisors, we have all sorts of information on colleges and universities and scholarships. And that is, that is information that you can trust. So students, parents, others, who want to explore scholarship opportunities, educational opportunities in the United States, look up your U.S. Embassy. I realized during COVID, a lot of these centers are closed, but there are still services available online. The other point I wanted to make is, having heard Myrna's excellent presentation, is like the Liberian government, the U.S. also gets evaluated by the Trafficking in Persons Office. So I hope that Atlanta or Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's good news story is something that you've shared in the past or will share in the future with the State Department's team with data, because that's what we encourage. Whether they'll include it, if there's innovation, if there's something you're doing that's just outstanding and no one else is doing it, I would imagine that you might even get included in the trafficking persons report. If you've already been included in the trafficking persons report because of the great work the airport's been doing, so be it. But again, this is a reminder that in the United States there are lots of international airports, and we can't include everybody's data. But now you know how to reach me, and I can put you in touch with the right people in Washington. Over.
Thank you for that really important comment, Joel. And I'm hoping that the embassy is able to advertise its clearinghouse of educational opportunities in the social media universe, where young people are finding these alternate advertisements that may be leading them in the wrong direction. It's really powerful how much information young people get just from things like Facebook ads and other places where tempting offers are always, coming across the transom. And it's a wonderful way to reach young people, but anything that gives them information about what the embassy offers in terms of educational opportunities would be incredibly valuable in this space. Thank you for that. Myrna,
I could hear Joel was a little muffled, but I heard him ask about our sharing the good news, and we would certainly like to do that. If you could, I don't know if Alreen already has your contact information or not, but I do not. So if you are able to either put it in the chat to us or email us, and we will be happy to share that information with you.
Okay, so I have gotten a few more questions that have just come in the last few minutes. Some of the questions are things that we have touched upon, but others aren't. Others are not. So let me ask this question. Cheryl Davenport Dozier asked this. She says, thank you, Marna. This information has been very helpful. However, in doing DEI work, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, white businessmen around the world are considered privileged and are rarely questioned by white and African officers. Even when questioned, they are often believed and trusted. What kind of training is done to challenge the thinking that privileged white businessmen are able to be trusted and that can be corrupt and be participating in trafficking? Can you address that question?
Well, I think it all goes back to proper training. If your entities are trained, whether they are police officers or political appointees, then they know that you cannot racial profile in human trafficking. Trafficking has no color, has no economic status. That's what proper training will help folks to see. Now, I don't know if Cheryl is referring to one particular area or throughout one particular country. I'm not sure what region, but wherever it is, the foundation is proper training and support from all of the entities involved, going back to the potential forum that we've discussed, making sure that both law enforcement and the political leaders understand the importance of training and what the indicators are and how we can all work together to combat it.
Thank you for that answer, Marna. I do think that including issues about identity and bias in the training is a strategy, and it sounds like the two things that you all are talking about come together ultimately in one place.
Absolutely.
So that's a very valuable point, because it's true that, I as a psychologist can speak to the point that everyone carries implicit bias, and this influences how we read the reality of the people that we encounter in any situation, and learning to pause and ask ourselves questions about those assumptions to help us evaluate a situation, particularly when we're trying to stop something negative like trafficking, is a really important piece of the puzzle. All right, I think that I'm going to ask one more question from the Q&A box before we adjourn for a break. And this is a question that comes from Aramatha K. Fala. She asks, how can we stop human trafficking and what can we do as airport workers in stopping human trafficking? So if you had to address and answer specifically to different kinds of airport workers about what they can do, Myrna, what would be your closing advice on that subject?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but training is it. If the airport workers in Liberia should be trained, and that's what we will address when we put together this forum that Alreen is going to be working on. We can share with you the training program that we have here at the airport, and making sure that every employee goes through that training. It's not going to happen all in one day. There will be a structure that is developed to make sure that that happens, but that is the key, making sure that airport workers are trained. And then her other question had to do with to whom those reports would go. Now that's something that needs to be established as well, because employees, if they are trained, once they are trained, they have to know how they can report these potential incidents when they occur. So that's all part of having a structured, effective anti-human trafficking program. And that's what we want to work with you to make sure that you can implement it and be effective with it.
Thank you very much. So on that note, we will head into a break. And since we're in 3 different time zones, let me tell you what time we're coming back. The plan is for the next presentation to begin promptly at 15 minutes after the hour. If you are in the United States on East Coast time, that will be 10:15 a.m. If you are tuning in from Liberia, that will be at 2:15 p.m. And if you are tuning in from Brussels, that will be at 3:15 p.m. So please, we know on Zoom how important it is to have breaks. So we're having that break now. Please come back just before that time, and so that we can be ready to introduce our very next very important speaker. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back from the break, and I'd like to turn it back over to my esteemed colleague, Honorable Blanford, for the introduction of our next speaker.
Thank you, Laylee. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to make this important and next introduction. I hope, Madam Sadie Tar, are you on? I just chatted with you. I think you are nearby.
Yes, I'm on.
Good. And do we have you on video?
Yes, I am on video.
Good, wonderful. Thank you so much. So again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back on time. So that we can begin session 3, the Government of Liberia Human Trafficking Task Force. My job today, right at this moment, is to introduce a new friend, Her Excellency Willamette Sadie Tar, Minister of Gender, Children, and Social Protection of the Republic of Liberia. Madam Minister is a consummate, well-rounded professional of over 17 years of senior managerial proficiency, with expertise in social policy, communications, business, and nonprofit, currently serving as the Republic of Liberia's Minister of Gender, Children, and Social Protection. As an ardent advocate for women, children, and youth's rights, she has maximized the opportunity to leverage her multi-talented skills of working with diverse groups. She is self-motivated and results-oriented, and she's at the highest level of Liberia's executive cabinet. She has a background in restorative justice and advocacy. She has a unique ability to contribute immensely to the government's national and international advocacy efforts, given her decade of work as an African community advocate in the diaspora with immigrant families and similar work at home in Liberia. Since her appointment in 2018 by His Excellency Dr. George Manawia, President of the Republic of Liberia, to serve as this minister, she continues to wholeheartedly work to ensure in the implementation and the growth and sustainable impact of high performance in all of the work that she does for the pro-poor governance policy environment. Key among her achievements is that she's a leader and in successfully streaming gender in the country's development plan. Her international and purposeful work to fight sexual and gender-based violence has ultimately been noticed by local and international partners alike, thus enabling her to clinch the United States government's Women of Courage 2021 award through the U.S. Embassy accredited near Monrovia. Prior to serving as the Minister of Gender and Social Protection, she began her public service duty with the Liberian National Police and then moved on to Libtelco, the Liberian Telecommunications Corporation, before traveling to the United States to complete her education. Minister Tarr holds a master's degree in advocacy and political leadership from the University of Minnesota in Duluth, Minneapolis, a bachelor's of arts degree in communication studies from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and an associate of science degree in business management from the Minneapolis Community and Technical College. She's an outstanding leader in all that she does in the community. We are so honored to have her here today. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Minister Sadie Tarr. Madam Minister.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm so very happy to be here today. I, first of all, just want to acknowledge my co-speakers, Honorable Joel Marbury of the U.S. Embassy accredited near Monrovia. I want to acknowledge you, our honorary consul in the state of Georgia there, Madam Layli Marpayan, the Executive Director of the Wesleyan Centers for Women, Mr. Jeremy Hendricks, Head of Security and Crisis Emergency Response Air Brussels, Mr. Michael Smith, Adelana Hartsfield there, and all of the other speakers who spoke before me, and other anti-human trafficking experts here, our distinguished organizers of this event. I want to definitely acknowledge and say thanks to our partners and supporters, United States Embassy near Monrovia, the Wesleyan Centers of Women, the University Consortium, Brussels Airlines, University of Liberia, Liberia Airport Authority, the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, and all others. And want to again just speak and say hello, and like we're saying, like we had to, so our distinguished participants and online viewers, and to all others on this Zoom. I want to say again, good afternoon to you all, and depending on wherever you are, you know, I guess afternoon, evening, morning, greetings to you also. I'm glad to be speaking during this human trafficking awareness virtual workshop under the theme, Trapped in Transit, Combating Human Trafficking in Transportation, Travel and Tourism in Liberia. Today, I'll be doing a little background. We'll talk about progress and achievements, and then concluding. As stakeholders, we are all concerned about addressing human trafficking of all forms in Liberia. Therefore, we have gathered through this platform to be able to heighten the awareness around human trafficking, particularly making it possible for workers at all levels to recognize the signs of human trafficking and to know how to respond to and report on human trafficking, as well as for us all to understand how we can contribute to ending human trafficking in Liberia. With that said, I would like to begin that the amended 2021 Anti-Human Trafficking Law of Liberia defines human trafficking as the act of the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. In view of this, trafficking in person is a serious crime in Liberia and has been observed as one of the worst forms of human rights violation, with victims being mostly women and children. In my ministry, the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection has been actively involved in preventing and responding to human trafficking through awareness raising and provision of shelter, psychosocial support, and reunification of survivors, respectively. Incidentally, I just want to say that for a minute there, I know Joel spoke from the end of the U.S. Embassy. It was almost like he was giving my entire speech. So I will try to not repeat a lot of what he said, but I think it's worth commending that the embassy is paying attention to what we're doing since we got our notice from them. So according to the report from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC, women make up 71% of trafficking victims, while children account for 1/3 of the total number. Notwithstanding, recent data have shown a sharp increase in the number of children that are being trafficked globally, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Humans are trafficked for several different reasons, but sexual exploitation and forced labor remain the most prominent forms of detected, with sexual exploitation accounting for 79%. Liberia's own accession to the Palermo Protocol on 22nd September of 2004 provided a pathway for the country to be able to legally address trafficking in persons. As you may be aware, the Palermo Protocol, consisting of 3 protocols that were adopted by the United Nations to supplement the 2000 Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. The Palermo Convention, namely the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, the protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air, and the protocol against the illicit manufacturing and trafficking in firearms, their parts, and components and ammunition. These protocols and conventions fall within the jurisdiction of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Now, on the 5th of July 2005, Liberia enacted a law to ban trafficking in persons within the Republic of Liberia. Since then, substantial progress has been made in combating trafficking in persons in Liberia. In 2019, Liberia was upgraded to Tier 2 because obviously we demonstrated overall increasing efforts in the fight against trafficking in persons compared to the previous reporting period. There was a significantly increase in investigations of internal trafficking, which came out as a recommendation in previous reports. And we allocated a budget to the Anti-Trafficking Task Force for the first time since 2014. A national referral mechanism was initiated, as well as increased awareness and identification of potential trafficking victims. These progresses were quickly derailed as a result of the devastating effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic generated conditions that influenced the increase of several different types of vulnerabilities in already vulnerable groups such as women, girls, and children. The declaration of the national emergency further hindered reporting, investigation, and subsequently prosecution. Prevention initiatives drew down as most of government's fundings were diverted towards the prevention and response to the pandemic. Additionally, the observation of the public health protocol made it even harder. There were challenges that led to Liberia's downgrading to Tier 2 watch list in 2021. However, cognizant of the distinct responsibility that my government bear under the Palermo Protocol to criminalize human trafficking in all of its forms and to prosecute and hold offenders accountable for their crimes, the government of Liberia, through the Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, on which my ministry is a co-chair, remained engaged. The government of Liberia have made progress and continue to work in implementing legislation, policies, and programs that are geared towards ending all forms of human trafficking. Earlier this year, the government of Liberia, through the Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, hired 10 lawyers to draft the new amendment of the 2005 Act to ban trafficking in persons in Liberia. The amended act was validated by the Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force and sent to both the lower and upper houses, the National Legislature, for passage. And you've already heard a bit about this through presentation earlier. Today, I'm very excited to be able to add on and say that the new amended act has been endorsed by the president and was passed into hand bill and launched on the 29th of October, 2021. The law has in it a change of balance between civil liability and criminal conviction, and also includes restitution for victims for damages incurred as a result of trafficking. Under this new law, in accordance with Section 5, all legal persons held liable shall be subject to effective, proportionate, and dissuasive criminal or non-criminal sanctions, including monetary sanctions and award of restitution to the trafficking victim. A court of competent jurisdiction shall sentence a person convicted of the crime of trafficking in persons to a minimum of 20-year imprisonment, and in accordance with several sentencing guidelines. For instance, whoever holds or returns any person to a condition of trafficking or arrests, detains any person with the intention to place them in or returning them to or condition of trafficking shall be fined a sum of 100,000 United States dollars or its Liberian equivalent, or be imprisoned to a term of not more than 20 years or both. If death results from the violation, or if the violation includes kidnapping or attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to kill, the defendant shall be fined under this title the sum of not less than 200,000 United States dollars, or imprisoned for any term of not less than 20 years or life, or both. In addition, where a defendant is convicted of trafficking in persons under Section 5, the court shall order the defendant to pay restitution as the court will find it fit and sufficient to the victim for a cost of medical and psychosocial treatment, cost of physical and occupational therapy and rehabilitation, cost of necessary transportation, temporary housing, lost income, attorney's fees, and other costs such as victim advocate fees, compensation for emotional distress, pain, and suffering, any other loss suffered by the victim, any other costs as may be assessed by the court. Noting that Liberia now has some of the most stringent law on human trafficking in the world, we will continue to collaborate with local and international NGOs and civil society to strengthen victim protections at the policy and grassroots levels, take prevention measures, and raise public awareness about the dangers of trafficking in person. In this light, the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection established, trained, and empowered more community welfare committees. These are community members who are trained to report child abuse, including trafficking. The Ministry of Labor is also reactivating the trafficking in person meetings at the county levels. With support from UN Women and the government and partners, Anti-SGBV Roadmap 2020-2022. We also have support from UNTP. Our call center response center has been established so that we can respond to calls of distress, including trafficking in person. And this call center has been operational since the earlier part of the COVID pandemic, and is still operational till now, and it's open 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. With support from the ILO, the Ministry of Labor is running a safe home for adult victims of trafficking in persons. And we have 4 additional safe homes that are being set up in Bombing County, Grand Juda County, Lofa County, and Nima County. And with support from UNICEF, the Ministry of Gender is running an interim care center that provides care and protection for children victims of trafficking in person. By October of 2020, the government of Liberia under the Weah-Led administration had provided 75,000 United States dollars to the Ministry of Labor for the fight against trafficking in persons. In fiscal year 2021, so this year alone, financial support was increased to 200,000 United States dollars. During the adjustment of the fiscal year to calendar year, another 100,000 United States dollars was provided to cover the 6 months period extension. Now for the 2022 calendar year, 200,000 United States dollars has been proposed by the Ministry of Labor to fight trafficking in persons for that fiscal year. To sum up, the Ministry of Labor has received to date for 2021, $300,000 in order to help the fight against trafficking in person. The government has provided funding for law reform, prosecution, victim support, and awareness. Law reform was completed with the research, drafting, vetting, passage by the legislature, signing into law by the president, and publication into handbill by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the amendment to the anti-human trafficking law. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has printed the trafficking in person law into handbills, and it has been delivered for more awareness and behavioral changes campaign, which is something that's very important as we go about this fight. Now, prosecution is ongoing of 6 cases this November term of court. These cases could not be proceeded with because of the moratorium placed on jury trial occasioned by the COVID-19 second wave. The government of Liberia contracted additional 5 seasoned lawyers to assist the Ministry of Labor prosecute these cases and expedite police investigations. On witness support, we have several males and females from Sierra Leone and the Ivory Coast and Cameroon in our safe homes under our care and protections, with psychosocial support provided, majority of whom complain of being victimized by a group known as QNet, an international syndicate operating under the pretense of being involved with trading via internet like Amazon. Legal proceedings is underway to ban them from operating in Liberia by closing down all the independent contractor offices. QNet does not pay taxes to government of Liberia, neither is it a registered business in Liberia. Also, a special security task force has been organized strictly for trafficking in persons cases and will be hosted at the Ministry of Labor. On awareness, in addition to the Liberian Council of Churches, the Liberian Muslim Congress, traditional leaders, and student unions assisting in this effort, local NGOs are being contracted to spread the human trafficking and child labor messages in all of our 15 counties. And this is being done through live dramas, radio talk shows, jingles, posters, stickers, town hall meetings, town criers, movies, loudspeakers, etc. The government itself, through funding under the implementation of the Intersectional and Gender-Based Violence Roadmap that was hosted on the auspices of His Excellency the President himself, and we at the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection are the lead, has been able to disburse $10,000 to the Ministry of Labor in order to help address trafficking in persons and child labor for the reproduction of the National Action Plan on Trafficking in Persons and Child Labor, including the printing and distribution of the awareness material. Last month, the Trafficking in Person Case Monitoring Protocols and Procedures document was signed by ourselves, the Ministry of Labor, and the Liberia Drug Enforcement Agency. And this was an event that is supported by IDLO, and it was considered a high-level discussion on the national referral pathways and the TIP case monitoring protocols and procedures. It was for bringing senior officials together to have an appreciation of these documents that their technical teams deal with regularly to avoid challenges in executing their duties. From the 25th to the 30th of October 2021, IDLO conducted exclusive training for county attorneys, circuit court judges, and joint training for county attorneys, public defenders, and law enforcement officers in Buchanan. And this was important because it helped people understand exactly how to deal with cases that involve TIP. Yesterday, the National Anti-Trafficking Task Force stakeholders endorsed the Trafficking in Person guidelines for communication and coordination. We also believe that trafficking is linked to economic issues. In this light, we have extended our social cash transfer program, and that's on the end of the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. We went ahead and extended our social cash transfer program to include communities that are more vulnerable, and even adding an urban cash transfer component in Monserrate during the because of COVID, and that is still ongoing. The Ministry of Gender is also currently working with UNICEF on a proposal to curtail the advent of street children, who most times are victimized by parents giving them to family members to come from rural to urban areas for the purpose of attaining better education. Unfortunately, these kids are used to be breadwinners, and the situation then slides into a form of child trafficking. We need a complete, sustainable process from the rural, from the streets, to help check shelter, feeding, all the way through until reunification with the family members. We also are strengthening the coordination between the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, as chair and co-chairs of the Trafficking in Person Task Force, and the Ministry of Justice, and other actors to include the Liberia National Police, Liberia DEA, the Ministry of Health, and now we're saying that we really need to join hands and bring in also the Liberia Airport Authority, and also continue working with the Liberia Immigration Service, of course. And we want to do this to ensure that the referral pathway and the road to justice is accomplished. The Ministry of Justice will ensure that parents or guardians will now be held accountable for giving children out to those who dice them into child labor or child trafficking. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is with a heavy heart but a bold face that I openly say to you that amidst this progress, our challenges remain overwhelming. And of course, it's the open secret that we were brought down to the tier 2 watch lists. We need to increase efforts to investigate and prosecute trafficking cases, as internal trafficking cases remains a challenge due to a lack of logistics. We're very happy that we're now infusing more dollars under the WIA-led administration into fighting trafficking in person, especially internal trafficking, but we know that we definitely need to put more towards logistics to ensure that this happens. We need more law enforcement officers to get a basic knowledge and information of what trafficking in person is, and thus the need for capacity building and training of more law enforcement and judicial officers on identifying, investigating, and prosecuting trafficking cases under the new amended 2021 anti-trafficking law. And this needs to take place nationwide. We're very happy that IDLO has started with that already. And we hope that we'll be seeing all of this happening throughout the country so that we have strengthened coordination amongst all of the relevant actors to ensure that we can, first of all, prevent trafficking. But if it comes to it, then the response will be full-fledged and will involve everybody, and we'll be able to do it to the best of our ability, considering that it is trafficking in person, and being able to stick by the laws that we have to abide by and be able to prosecute within those measures. Trafficking within a country is more prevalent than transatlantic trafficking. And so we have more internal trafficking. And most victims are children who are transported from rural to urban communities under false promises of giving them a better life. And so we really are all about doing a lot of outreach and awareness, especially in the countryside, in the rural areas, because we want to be able to really have our people who live in the rural area really understand what the concept is. Because a lot of times people do not understand what the concept is around trafficking. And this is something that has been done from time immemorial when people give their children out and think that they are going to have better life in urban areas. And they feel that, when they send the child to town, that child is going to be better off, whereas most times that is not the case. And with the amended law, we see that even those parents are going to be held liable now. So it's important for them to be informed. So ladies and gentlemen, with respect to the minimum standards for the elimination of human trafficking under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the TVPA, my government continues to exert efforts across the 3P, the paradigm of prosecuting traffickers, protecting victims, and preventing the crime. And we have realized that this cannot be achieved by us alone. That is why we continue to involve and engage our international partners, our civil society actors and grassroots actors and the communities. And we ask you all and all of us to join hands in combating this heinous crime of trafficking in persons. To close, I will give you a quote from Albert Einstein, who once said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." We have to find a way to change the story for Liberia. We appreciate all of you who are putting arms around us to do that. Our intention is to change our community for the better, be it trafficking in persons, sexual and gender-based violence, all of those that are interlinking. And at this juncture, I would like to thank you all for the level of support, particularly our UN partners, our traditional ally, the United States of America, and its embassy accredited to Monrovia, near Monrovia, the IDLO, our civil society, and members of the Trafficking in Persons Task Force, and all other actors in Liberia and out of Liberia, like you are on the call today. All of you there working with our Consul General and with our new friends at the Wesley College there. Together, we can meaningfully tackle and end human trafficking in Liberia. I thank you, and I'm open now for any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Minister. And it's really clear to me why you have clinched the United States government's Women of Courage 2021 award to the U.S. Embassy accredited in Monrovia for your outstanding leadership in this space. So thank you so much for the presentation. Just to make a footnote here, the progress and achievements, we know we have challenges. We're very happy to hear those the progress and achievements that government has been making, the passage and signing into law, the amended anti-human trafficking law, the establishment and training of community welfare committees, the reactivation of TIP meetings at the county levels, very important to have that voice heard, establishment of the TIP call center. We'd love to hear more about that because, of course, people will be wanting to know how do they make a report of any issues that might come up in terms of human trafficking. We have 911. Is that call center up and live and available for people who have those kinds of concerns and emergencies? The availability of safe homes, we'd love to hear more about that as well as time goes on. Where are those safe homes where people can go to have safe harbor? The budgetary support, very impressive to hear about the upgrade in terms of the financial commitment under President Weah's leadership that has been assigned to this particular issue. And of course, the printing of the TIP law to handbill for awareness and behavioral changes campaigns. Outstanding. And I'm sure that the U.S. Embassy under the leadership of Joel Mayberry was pleased to hear this update. All of this will be wrapped into our report that will be submitted as a part of this workshop in January of 2022. So Honorable Minister, thank you again for taking the time. You're in Glasgow attending the climate change conference. We know you are very, very busy, but your voice was so important to be heard this morning, and Godspeed and blessings. We hope to see you. We'll be there in December planning for phase 2 of the workshop. Layli will talk a little bit more about that, but we hope to see you in December as we further our discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'm very, very hopeful that we'll be getting out of the watch list, getting back onto tier 2 and even climbing further to tier 1. I hope that with everything that we're putting in, because we really are paying attention to what the American government sent to us and the prioritized recommendations for our government. And we're sure that at the end of it, by the time March rolls around, we would have climbed up. We're keeping our fingers crossed.
That sounds excellent. And count us in as new members of your family and your team to help bring that positive report coming. You're so very, very welcome. And to your question, you sent me a text message about the video, just to let the listening audience here know that the video will be made available for training purposes only. And we also encourage you, if you're making contacts with some of our speakers, you please keep us informed or copied. We are tracking any challenges, any opportunities and next steps, keeping us in the loop, because those types of information sharing would also be wrapped into our final report for the embassy. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you. Layli, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. That really was a wonderful report by Minister Tarr. It's clear that we're coming out of the pandemic and there's some very dynamic things being done to help move us back in the direction of addressing the challenges that have been lingering around countering trafficking in Liberia. And I can't wait to see how all of these new developments evolve. And it was especially exciting to hear that the trafficking law itself was just updated within the last few weeks. So these are all very heartening developments. So I now want to transition us into the next session, which if you have your schedule know is where we'll have the privilege of hearing from 2 trafficking research experts from the Wellesley Centers for Women. The Wellesley Centers for Women, which is also known as WCW, is a women and gender-focused academic research and action institute located at Wellesley College, the premier college for women in the United States, located in Wellesley, Massachusetts. WCW harnesses the power of data and gold standard social science research to move the needle on issues affecting women and girls, families and communities, and all their diversity in the United States and around the world. Thanks to researchers like the ones I'm about to introduce, WCW has provided needed data to policymakers, practitioners, activists, and advocates alike for nearly 50 years. Linda M. Williams, PhD, is a senior research scientist and founding director of the Justice and Gender-Based Violence Research Initiative at the Wellesley Centers for Women. For more than 40 years, Linda Williams has directed research on violence against women, sexual exploitation of children, sex offenders, and the consequences of child abuse. The focus of her current work is on justice system response to sexual violence, commercial sexual exploitation of women and children, human trafficking, intimate partner violence, and child maltreatment. Her work strives to ensure that the voices of women and children are heard. Previously, she served as professor of criminal justice and criminology at the University of Massachusetts Lowell from 2005 to 2015. She now serves as professor emerita. Williams has been the principal investigator on 18 US federally funded research projects and has directed research funded by the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, the National Institute of Mental Health, the US Department of Justice, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the US Department of Defense, the US Air Force, and many private foundations. In sum, she is one of the leading internationally recognized experts on all forms of gender-based violence. I'd also like to introduce Kate Price, PhD, who is a visiting scholar at the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College, where she's completing a writing project on the commercial sexual exploitation of children in Appalachia. Prior to her appointment at the Wellesley Centers for Women, Kate Price was also a visiting scholar at the Women's Studies Research Center at Brandeis University. In December 2019, Kate earned her doctorate in sociology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and completed her dissertation on state-level legislative decisions to prevent the arrest and prosecution of commercially sexually exploited minors for prostitution in the United States. During her doctoral studies, Price received numerous awards. In 2005, she received a master's degree in gender and cultural studies from Simmons University. A survivor of the commercial sexual exploitation of children, specifically family-controlled child sex trafficking and child sexual abuse imagery, Kate Price frequently collaborates with national and state-level advocates and policymakers to shape and draft policy to combat commercial sexual exploitation of children. She serves on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's Child Sex Trafficking Survivor Advisory Board and was a founding member of the End Child Pornography and Trafficking USA, also known as ECPAT USA Advisory Council. A peer reviewer for the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, Price frequently lectures on her research and survivor advocacy at numerous academic conferences, universities, and non-governmental organizations. She has also published numerous articles and reports related to child and adolescent sex trafficking, particularly the legal and legislative aspects. So we're going to hear from Dr. Kate Price first, followed by a presentation by Dr. Linda Williams, and then we'll have time for audience questions and answers. So as you listen, please feel free to add questions to the Q&A box and be prepared to speak at the end of Linda's presentation. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you so much to the distinguished guests and people sponsoring this. I'm in awe, and I'm very, very privileged and honored to be attending today and participating today. Let me share my screen first for my presentation. Okay, can everyone see that? Wonderful. Okay, so today I will be talking about human trafficking specifically for travel professionals. You all are the eyes and the ears of our travel gateways, and transportation was part of my exploitation. This is not letting me advance. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So first, let me share a little bit of my history. I am a survivor, as Dr. Mapayan had said. I am a survivor of family-controlled commercial sexual exploitation of children. I was exploited by an immediate family member from my very first memories until about age 11 or 12, about the time that I had hit puberty. Transportation was part of my exploitation in two ways. One, I was trafficked primarily to truckers. I grew up along an interstate in Northern Appalachia, and truckers were my traffickers' primary clientele. Trafficking does still happen very much at this on the same interstate, and federal and local officials have continued to find a very strong presence of trafficking in this area, which is why I am doing the writing project and I'm working with local officials for that. The other way that transportation was part of my exploitation is when I ran away from home in high school. I actually ran through, I ran away to Smith College, which is a women's college. And so many people run away maybe to exciting places like New York or Las Vegas or something. I ran away to a women's college, and I now work at a women's college. But still, having gone through Port Authority, which is one of the primary recruiting grounds for commercial sexual exploitation of children in the United States, just that I could have been identified in these two places. So therefore, it's really important to me to be talking to local international officials around travel. Next, I'm going to share a picture of myself of what I looked like when I was being trafficked. And imagery to me is incredibly important. I think we often think about trafficking in terms of chains and ropes and being, trapped in a room, to be covered in bruises, to be looked disheveled. This is what I looked like. This was my kindergarten picture. This was literally in the middle of my trafficking. I am the quintessential blonde-haired, blue-eyed child. I was not malnourished. I did not have any visible bruises. I do not look sad. I would have been walking with a family member. And so that poses a very difficult question in terms of how would I have been identified as a trafficking victim? I think it would have been incredibly difficult. When people ask me that question, the only thing I can ever think about is I was often taken out in the middle of the night. And so could have been questioned of like, well, why do you have this child out on a school night, in the middle of the night? To which though, my exploiter, who was a white man, I loved that question when someone said, well, in terms of, white men have the privilege of being believed at everything. My exploiter probably would have said, oh, I'm taking her to the doctor, or, oh, we're traveling to see family. We're having a family emergency. My trafficker was very, very charming. And so I think would have been very much undetected. What I always like to tell people though, is still ask the question, if you are perfect, if you're safe though, make sure that your own safety is there and is paramount. But you can disrupt the process by asking the questions like, I don't know, something still feels off. I don't know if I quite believe you that, you're going to the doctor, you're going, because in my experience, exiting trafficking, stopping trafficking, it's not an event, it's a process. It's a process of, granted, in this picture, I was 6 years old, but I did reach out to, via CB radio, like a ham radio, I reached out to my trafficker's person who was collaborating. I found him, I knew something was wrong. And I started to ask questions, so you can see I was a social scientist very early. I knew, this person was important to my being trafficked. So just asking questions and disrupting those systems is what is incredibly important. I want to share, we've gone over this quite a bit already, so I just wanted to be clear in terms of what is trafficking. I think oftentimes we do think about transportation and we think about that there has to be, you are being taken from one place to the next. That is true, but you don't have to cross state lines or you don't have to cross borders. I was trafficked in my home. I was in our backyard. I was trafficked at a local rest area, and I was taken 45 minutes away to a more of a central, like an urban hub. But I never crossed state lines. I never left the country. And I barely left my town. In fact, people very much came to me. So those state lines did not have to be crossed in order for this to be trafficking. What is important though is the presence of force, fraud, or coercion. However, it's important for me to say is it's not always even the presence of force, fraud, or coercion by another person. Economic instability is paramount in terms of the systems of trafficking that is often poor children, poor people. Poverty is central. It's economic insecurity is a central component of human trafficking. And so the economy could be what is coercive, not being able to secure employment, not being able to secure housing or food. That's what life does the coercing. Is a wonderful quote by Rachel Moran. Her book, Paid For, is a wonderful book. I can always put it in the chat. But she talks about life does the coercing. It doesn't necessarily have to be another person. Examples of human trafficking, we've already talked about this. I know we very much, usually focus on sex trafficking. That was my experience, but there's also labor trafficking. A study that I recently did at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, we actually found that people who were trafficked for sex, the majority of people were also trafficked for domestic servitude as well. So they were used in both capacities. They were made to do domestic work in the house, and then they were also sex trafficked as well by the same exploiter, which was the first time I had ever seen the majority of victims, were at that intersection of sex trafficking and domestic work. The other piece is talking about throwaway or runaway children, are groomed for sex work by predatory adults, or doing survival sex. Sometimes we talk about like, well, where are the parents? We just need to make sure the parents are more involved. Well, it's children who are actually as in part of Child Protective Services or child welfare who are the most vulnerable. A local organization in Boston called My Life, My Choice, they find that 67 to 75% of the child sex trafficking victims and survivors that they work with have been involved with foster care at one point. So those are the most vulnerable children. Oops, excuse me one second. And then the last, I will also say culturally sanctioned histories of exploitation. Trafficking is very often intergenerational. While I have no empirical proof of this, I am absolutely certain that my exploiter was trafficked by an immediate family member, and that immediate family member who exploited my trafficker was also exploited. This goes back generations upon generations. And it's very much culturally sanctioned. Where I grew up in Appalachia, it was very much this sense of, well, this is just what those families do to one another. That's their role. And so, that it makes me, as a white woman talking about trafficking, child sex trafficking in Liberia, I'm very aware of my positionality there, that I am a white woman and not a person of color. And at the same time, in where I grew up, which is a primarily white area, there's very much of this hierarchy of even within economic impoverishment, there is the lowest of the low. And it was really my job. That was what I was born to do. Basically, it was seen as my job that I was going to be exploited, and that's what we did. And then people were just going to look the other way because that was family business. That's something that we, that people do not get involved in. Like the other piece of what I talk about is in terms of human trafficking, is that human trafficking, it is predicated on dominance and control. Sex trafficking, labor trafficking, we're talking about power and control, particularly of a white patriarchal system. So looking at threats, coercion, but also intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, denying, blaming, minimizing, sexual abuse. Up to 90% of all human trafficking victims and survivors have significant trauma histories where you have literally a relational template from childhood. This was very much my experience, a relational template from childhood of dominance and control, of being abused, of trauma. And so our bodies are wired to fight, flight, freeze, collapse. And if you're trapped in interpersonal trauma, which I collapsed. That's still what I do to this day, even though I've had, as you might imagine, a tremendous amount of therapy and have done a lot of works to even be able to do this work. My first instinct for when I have a trauma response is to collapse, because that is exactly as our bodies are wired, as our brains are wired. I just shut down in times of trauma, dissociated, things like that. So that is what exploiters, that's what traffickers prey upon, that wanting to look for that abuse history so that you do just collapse, that you are used to being isolated, you're used to being betrayed in relational experiences, that you are used to being obedient. Obedience is the absolute number one thing that traffickers look for. And then also just in terms of using physical abuse, using privilege and economic abuse as well. So I highly recommend this graphic. As you can see, it was adapted from the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, the Duluth model of power and control, which Minister Tar went to school or in that area. So this is a really important graphic because I think oftentimes we just really do think about people being locked away, and it really falls into these tropes of the similar tropes of domestic violence of, well, why doesn't the person just leave? Particularly in America, where we are seen as this land of opportunity, this land of Title IX, girls having soccer fields and opportunities and all of these things. How in the world can someone, particularly a blonde hair, blue-eyed white girl, be trapped in trafficking? And it is all of these pieces are the puzzle that keep you, trapped in a psychological state as well. I did just want to leave with a couple indicators and travel resources. As Dr. Mapayan had said, I was actually a founding board member for ECPAT USA, very proud of that. I only left ECPAT USA board just because I was asked to be on another board for the National Centers for Missing and Exploited Children in the United States, and really wanted to open the doors for some new people to be a part of ECPAT, and so then that I could move on to the National Centers for Missing and Exploited Children. When I am a part of a board, I really like to give my all to it. And as you might imagine, this work is very difficult for me, but I'm very passionate about it. And so just really having to which is all to say, I'm still a tremendous supporter of ECPAT USA. I know earlier Ms. White had shared some indicators, so I won't go through these. But the tricky, I do like to share this slide though, sometimes though, is that because I didn't meet any of these. I didn't meet any of these indicators, even though transportation was part of what was going on. It was part of my exploitation. And at the same time, it is a place to start, because I do also I strongly believe in the work that ECPAT USA has done. And these are kind of a strong indicators of what could be trafficking. And at the same time, I also always remind people to please use your gut. And if you feel that something is off, do it, say it, say something, call 911. And granted that 911 and the police response might be more receptive to a white person than a person of color. And at the same time, acknowledging that privilege is important, that the police work differently for different races and ethnicities and for different classes. But at the same time, it still is an important place to start, particularly as we continue with training. I'm stopping my time here, had my timer on. I will just end with this slide, that there are additional resources. I know people had talked about wanting to have additional training. ECPAT USA's website, they are an international organization, but they're the USA arm of the organization has tremendous resources, and they have free online training specifically for travel and hospitality, and they have a separate training for training hotel associates as well. Granted, these are primarily in the United States, but they're free online resources that people may find helpful. There are also sample travel industry anti-trafficking policies and procedures. And as Mr. White had said, in terms of the Tourism Child Protection Code of Conduct, otherwise known as the code that the Atlanta airport has joined, you can get information there from that. And I will also just end by saying thank you to Ms. White and to Mr. Smith in terms of I get very triggered in airports and travel, as you might imagine, but I always enjoy going through the Atlanta airport. And now I see that it's a trauma-informed airport. And so that is, I appreciate all of your work. It is very much noticed by those of us who need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for that very compelling presentation. It was courageous and bold of you to share your personal story, but I know that it really helps inform this audience. And at the same time, it set the stage for everything you had to say in terms of recommendations. So I'm going to ask people to hold their questions for you personally until we can get through Linda's presentation, and we'll take both sets of questions together. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me, and thank you to everyone for organizing this this great meeting of folks, and hopefully it can be of some assistance to you. And thank you to Kate Price for sharing your experiences and and helping us to learn more too. And of course, now you're working in this area too, so that's wonderful. I'm going to continue really talking about some of the faces of trafficking in the United States based on our experience with interviewing young people on the streets. And you'll see that I think Kate introduced, Dr. Price introduced also the idea that we can be talking about runaway, homeless, thrown away youth, and they may present a different picture as well. So there's all sorts of issues that we need to address. I'm sure the one important message from today will be this: if you see something, say something, but also you may not see something and you still need to say something when you feel something in your gut. And so that was a good point. A big part of responding to this issue is recognizing trafficking is happening before your own eyes, be it for labor trafficking or sex trafficking or the combination of the two. It's seen as hidden in plain sight, so we do need to identify it, but then we need to also know what to do and have responses that will be useful for stopping it. Not only the laws critical to this, of course, approaches for identifying perpetrators and putting our attention to them and not punishing the survivors or the child victims, because that often is what happens or seems to happen from the point of view, particularly of adolescent youth who are perhaps treated differently too. I hope, oh good, my slides are moving along so you can see them, I hope. So what happens with adolescents when they present to us in the street, they present complex issues. And finding solutions and approaches to help survivors rather than punish them is a challenge, because sometimes we don't really want to deal with adolescents. And so what I did was some research on commercial sex trafficking in the US and interviewed children and young adults who had been on the streets and traded sex for a place to stay or money, or had been actually trafficked, pimped, sold for sex to customers, Johns, I guess I'd rather call them rapists, really. And so these are individuals who had these experiences. And I talked to them. What does this have to do with Liberia? Well, I can't be entirely sure. You'll have to tell me. One big issue is that there are challenging issues when you encounter youth who've been trafficked on the streets, and how to provide the proper supports for them and work with them. So one really interesting thing, my research focused on 2 cities in the United States, and we asked the young people we interviewed, and we really wanted to hear their stories the way they wanted to tell us. But we said, please, don't share identifying information. Don't talk about cities or locations. And yet we found that's what they talked about very often. They shared information about all the different cities they had been in. There were over 99 cities mentioned, and here we're talking to individuals in 2 cities. So they weren't from those 2 cities most of the time. They talked about 34 other states and even 12 or 14 other countries that they'd been to. So these are, in effect, internal migrants. Interesting to use that phrase, because it wasn't until I was attending a child maltreatment conference rather, in an international setting, and the co-panelist happened to be from Myanmar, but he was referring to the same kinds of kids I was talking about as internal migrants. And indeed, that's what they are in the US too. They're individuals who, crossing some state lines. They don't have to cross state lines, but who very often have, or even different towns or jurisdictions. And we need to make accommodations for that in our interventions, because you'll run into a child who really wants to go to school, who has a lot of capabilities, or maybe needs medical care. In the United States, we're very not united, as many of you may have observed, but we're not united in terms of jurisdictional issues around who pays for what. So it's hard to get a kid enrolled in a school if that's not her residence or his residence. Get the medical care. So we need to pay attention to multi-jurisdictional issues. Of course, that applies also when you're dealing with international trafficking and with kids going from Atlanta from Liberia to another location, to Las Vegas, wherever it is. And how do you get services that are appropriate and make accommodations for this? So that's really an important perspective here. This is kind of a busy slide. I think I just want to convey really here that the lives of these youth, as they described them to me, and as we know from our experience in this field, have been challenging and difficult, but they have survived. They've negotiated life at a very young age. And one of the key themes that came across in the some 60 some odd interviews we did is this notion of survival. Now, it's not survival like we might consider it survival, but for them, it is. They've had to deal with hunger, poverty, violent individuals, protect themselves. And so when we go to the next step of reaching out to help young people in this situation, we can't be viewing ourselves as rescuers. Rather, we need to partner with the youth so that we can hear from them what it is that they need, how they envision assistance, or else they might as well go back to where they were, because they feel forced, they feel abused. And so the partnership with young people, and here I'm particularly talking about, preteens and teenage and adolescents who have the capacity to also talk about this, but that we need to really hear their voices. This is a photo of a medical service van that we encounter in Boston, from an interesting group, and they provide services on the street, for homeless. They park in different locations and they provide some medical services. And to them, these youth are not invisible, but they do honor and try to meet the needs of the youth where they are too. So I had to put this in. I don't know if it's public, if we can I don't own this photo, but Barack Obama in his first administration went and provided volunteer services at a facility that provides services to homeless and runaway youth. And this is really part of the suggestion of the need for us to do something to help those individuals who are in this situation, but not just to, and who are hidden in plain sight. But how do we sort of deal with the fact that they are, so the light goes off in my office. If I put my hands up in the air, it goes back on. Hello. We're saving money at Wellesley Centers for Women every day. Sorry for the interlude. So the point is that you have to see the youth to help them, but you have to listen to them to help them and understand that these individuals need a safe place to stay with nutritious food and services that respect their survivor status and foster resilience rather than controlling them. Young people who've been in these situations have a lot of reasons not to trust adults, not to trust people in power or in charge, because oftentimes those are individuals that have abused them. And so it's very important to recognize this in developing partnerships to work with youth who've been maltreated. Let me see. So really, I just have a final summary slide. Just basically, these are my points. Don't ignore the youth, pay attention to them, and design both research. So if you're going to do more research in this area, you want to hear what's important for youth to know about, have them involved in developing a research study, but also their voices in programming must be heard. We must count and include their voices. And this young man, standing in front of a sign, if you can see it, but says, we believe the only way to keep a young person from returning to the streets is to provide consistent level of service that empowers them, nurtures them, dignifies and supports them. And this is the message we heard over and over again when we interviewed young people on the streets of the United States. So that's my message today, and hopefully we can respond to any questions or suggestions you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was an incredibly powerful and useful presentation, particularly since the issue of youth and children living on the streets is one in Liberia of concern. And you can be certain that some of the youth who are living on the streets in Liberia are facing some of the same kinds of issues and having some of the same kinds of perspectives that you mentioned. Although obviously it would be incredibly worthwhile to have a study in Liberia similar to the one that you conducted in the United States. Probably some of the findings would be very similar, but others would help highlight some of those cultural nuances that we really care about and help us come up with solutions that are really tailored to the Liberian context. I know that we started this session slightly late, and I want to try to end it still on time. So that gives us about 11 minutes for questions. A few questions have come in, and I'm going to pull those out. One of them came in asking the question of how do we address networking with religious groups regarding education on trafficking? I think this question came from someone who is Pastor Harris, who's interested as a pastor in bringing his church into the conversation and wants to know what are some ways that churches can be helpful in the issues that you've raised. So Linda, you might want to take a stab at that. And then Kate, if you have some commentary on that while I'm lining up the next question.
Well, we've recently been talking about how do you develop more venues for services for individuals who are on the street. And some of the best programs I have run into, and also there was one in London that reminded me of this too. For us, it was Thanksgiving. For them, it was Thursday, but I spent the day at a church that had opened its doors to have time on Thursday mornings for breakfast for those individuals who were trafficked, and there's different laws in England, but who have been exchanging sex for money. And they really wanted to bring them in and link them with services. And that is not unlike a program that existed during the time I was doing this research, existed in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Here you are, a stone's throw from major educational institutions in the United States, and yet there are children who are in these situations. Here, the church opened up its doors. It was not a religious affiliation, but it was a social concerned emphasis, that brought these churches to do this work. So maybe Kate, you have something else.
Yeah, I would echo similar. Churches, I think, provide tremendous resources. And in terms of finding a way for your church to be involved, I would just Google. I mean, churches are a tremendous resource within the anti-trafficking movement throughout the world. The one thing I do caution, though, is that there are some organizations that use, in my experience, organized religion as a way, it's a precursor I know of one organization that in order to receive services, receive shelter, you literally have to sign a waiver that you accept Jesus as your personal savior. And those conditions, this is again, me personally, I feel like that continues that dominance, that control. You need to do things my way. Granted, I say this as the daughter-in-law of a retired Episcopal minister. Going to church was something that was a very safe place for me growing up. I loved singing the song Jesus Loves Me. I didn't know who this Jesus person was, but like that somebody loved me out there, like I was grateful for it. And I loved going. And church is a very big part of Appalachia. I would love singing, they're called hillbilly hymns, specific hymns that are specific to the Appalachian region that I still love. So I would think of, in terms of religion, I think there's tremendous resource. I think there's tremendous spiritual resource. There's tremendous economic resource. But coming at it from a place of compassion. The Buddhist nun Pema Chodron has a wonderful quote, and I don't know if I'm going to be saying this exactly right, but compassion is not a relationship between the healing and the wounded. It's not that savior thing. It's my darkness, my weakness in me recognizes the darkness and the weakness in you, and let's come together in a shared humanity. And so if your church is coming at this from that perspective, which in my experience, most churches that do work with human trafficking are coming from that, I think there's a tremendous amount you can do. And I'm sure there's probably churches near you that are doing work, just reaching out to your vast network of pastors, being the daughter-in-law of a minister. I know you all are very close and talk all of the time and stuff. So I would just start asking around, and I'm sure you'll be able to find people doing things in your area.
Thank you, Kate. So now I want to turn to a question from a different occupation. Mr. Zina Dekena Goba from the Liberian National Police Force really asks what can he and members of his profession do or learn to be more effective in their work, both at the airport and more generally. So how would you, what suggestions would you make to police officers and police forces wanting to learn how to be more helpful around the issues you raised today?
I think Linda and I could both wax poetic about this for hours because we both really come from a policy perspective. So I will defer to Dr. Williams first, and then I will fill things in. How about we do that?
Thanks. There are so many things that
so many things
that police can do. I was racing through my mind. One is part of this training and seeing something and understanding when they have a person in their car because they think she's a prostitute, and it's like figure out how old they are and also understand the dynamics of it. And there's just so many issues around finding resources for youth. One of the biggest problems we found that police officers feel they have is that they don't know what to do with these kids. So it's like, is she or he a victim or a perpetrator? And what they know more about is locking up with the handcuffs and giving them to somebody else. And oftentimes there aren't a lot of services. So we really need to look at helping police find resources and educating them about the problem and then what they can do. One area I found I had some interesting findings about is how did youth end up on the streets in the United States, remember? And police would go to a home where there's domestic violence or where there's been fighting. It could have even involved a teen. And again, it's a matter of having community resources, sort of separating the adults in the way they do regarding domestic violence. But if there's a 14-year-old there saying, can you go stay with your auntie or go stay with your good friend or whatever? Well, this kid ends up then out in the community, couch surfing, a place where he or she is not wanted, and ends up on the street. There were so many youth who had ended up on the streets because of domestic violence in the home, but where people had eyes on it, where the police had seen it. Again, I'm not going to totally blame the police for this. it's really a lack of resources. Now, maybe Kate wants to talk about safe harbor a little, since that's an expertise of hers. But
Yeah, so that's what police are absolutely essential for this entire process, particularly, again, I can really only speak from the United States experience, but, you know, coming in a country with mass incarceration, you know, not a lot of money, you know, for services. So what do we have? What existing structures do we have? And jails are what we have more than emergency shelters. So in terms of a police officer asking what can they do, I think for me, it's by all costs, please do not arrest the person, whether they are a child or an adult that you're seeing as a victim. That is re-traumatizing. In fact, my research, you know, shows that in the United States, the vast majority of states retain the right, have recently passed legislation, retain the right to arrest and prosecute children for prostitution. And the calculus behind that is that they need to be able to leverage those threats of arrest and prosecution so that kids will get services. You need to be compliant. We need you to be compliant. And so I ask that you come from a place of compassion instead of compliance. And at the same time, I understand you police, you have a particular mission, but really coming from this place of what do you have? And if a jail is all you have, to collaborate and work with on a task force or within local organizations to get resources to have even an emergency shelter for a night, have a safe place for someone to go there where they can just rest, get off the streets for a little bit, or in terms of get away from a rapist, from a perpetrator, in a way that is non-punitive. Just having those non-punitive relationships. Again, my research shows that the more you have non-punitive relationships, the more someone can heal and navigate programs, and then systems level. That's the trick with trauma, is that what heals trauma is healing interpersonal relationships. And what's difficult about that is that most of the trauma that we experience is interpersonal violence. And so how do you heal that so someone can continue to work within these systems that could be terrifying from them? So just being that person within your mandate of being a police officer, but how do you do this in a trauma-informed way? And I'll just leave with the fact that in, you know, from saying this, in the United States in 2019, there were 214 minors were arrested for prostitution. That might not sound like a lot. It really might not sound like a lot. But when you think about, even as Ambassador Marbury talked about, from a federal level, you can't do that. You can't arrest or prosecute a minor for prostitution, but at a state level you can. So there's a lot of leeway, a lot of collaboration that you can do as a police officer. And as a police officer and as a prosecutor, you have the most power in this whole system. You really do. And again, I could wax poetic about that for hours as well, but that's where I end with that. Use your power to create a trauma-informed system of policing around trafficking.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you also, Linda. Those are some very powerful words to end this session on. And I know that in our longer term efforts to work collaboratively in Liberia to address trafficking, that working with the Liberia National Police will be just one of many ways that we will hope to do that as international partners. And I hope that both of you might be willing to be called upon for some future iterations of that work, because your voices are invaluable. So thank you so much. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Cynthia to bring us into our final session today.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for this powerful, powerful session. I've learned so much, and just the honesty and willingness to share your stories has been amazing. And I know, I know there are similar stories of women and boys, young girls in Liberia who want to tell their stories as survivors and victims. And I know that when Layli and I go in December to Liberia, we're going to be planning to have a a workshop focus group with LAA, the Liberian Airport Authority, to hear some of their other issues and concerns. But she'll also be preparing for the second phase of the workshop in 2022. It's really important to hear the voice of those who've been offended and hurt. And I know that this is just the beginning of our work, and I'm really excited. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Linda, for your powerful, powerful presentation. For those of us who might not know how deeply impactful and important your stories are. Thank you so very much for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, and we're getting ready to do a wonderful wrap up, I wanted to see if Visa Williams is on. She had some technical difficulties getting in. Visa, are you on? I think we're trying to get her in. Let me be sure she's joining us.
She's currently in the attendees section under U.S. Mission, Ambassador Visa Williams. I know James can transfer her over to the panelist side.
Yes, so James, that'd be great. So, okay, is she there? Oh, there she is, wonderful. Madam Ambassador, thank you so much. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I have a little bit of a froggy throat. I'm gonna go ahead and move on. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing to you Ambassador Retired Visa Williams, who is currently Senior Advisor for African Affairs at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations. We're so honored to have you. She is Special Advisor on Mali for the Carter Center. And since 2018, she has led the Carter Center's efforts as the independent observer for implementation of a peace agreement in Mali. She is also a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, where she teaches a course on peace building. Madam Ambassador's distinguished career in foreign service includes 2 years at the National Security Council in the White House, also U.S. Ambassador to Niger, Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs, and Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, where she led the delegation, the U.S. delegation, to talks in Havana, Cuba, ending a 7-year hiatus of high-level direct discussions. Upon retirement, Madam Ambassador co-founded Williams Strategy Advisors, LLC, while chairing boards dedicated to public health, food security, environmental sustainability, and more. Madam Ambassador received her Bachelor's of Arts degree, cum laude, from Yale, and holds a Master's of Science in National Security Strategy from the National War College of the National Defense University, a Master's of Arts and an ABD in Comparative Literature from the University of California, Los Angeles. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Ambassador Williams to bring remarks and a call to action. Madam Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Honorary Consul Blandford. Really, Cynthia, that was quite extensive and a lovely opening. And I want to thank the previous speakers. I was listening to your really important presentations, and the focusing at the United Nations. They often talk about putting the human face on development, putting the human face on human rights, and certainly you have cast. You've really painted that in detail, not broad brush, and I really appreciate that. I really have the honor of appearing on behalf of our U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield. She is the former U.S. Ambassador to Liberia, a strong partner with former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and friend of the Liberian people. During Ambassador Thomas Greenfield's time in Liberia, our two nations worked together with the United Nations to support Liberia's transition as it overcame a deadly 14-year-long civil war, facilitated a series of free and fair elections, and successfully embarked on its democratic journey in a peaceful transition. That remarkable transition started with early, close, and frequent coordination. The United States worked with the UN and Liberia to make sure everyone stayed committed to the overall long-term goal of transition to a safer and more secure Liberia. That meant engaging frequently with civil society, local stakeholders, the UN, and international partners, both throughout the government and in the broader NGO community. Key to this vision was ensuring that the government of Liberia was prepared and was also building confidence in their own local security institutions and their services. In partnership with the United Nations and other key stakeholders within the UN system, such as UN Women and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, we must continue to build on these established strong relationships between our two nations and to address the still persistent heinous crime of human trafficking, also known as trafficking in persons, a crime that shatters lives, families, and dreams. We must also work together to ensure the safety and security of all Liberians victimized by human trafficking, including the most vulnerable. Who are the most vulnerable? Because human trafficking operates in darkness, it is difficult to get the exact numbers of individuals who have been subject to human trafficking. According to UN Women, the vast majority of detected trafficking survivors are women and girls, with approximately 77% being subjected to human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. UN reporting indicates that these numbers have likely increased during the pandemic. That is why the United States strongly supports UN efforts to integrate the engagement and consideration of women in all UN policy, and in particular on this issue. This two-day workshop, sponsored by the Wellesley Centers for Women and the University Consortium for Liberia, is an example of such policy in action. As in the past, collaborative efforts involving law enforcement, prosecutors, regional and municipal officials, and Liberian civil society, including community leaders and women's groups, will continue to be important at the local level. That's illustrated by the presence of so many different stakeholders who can make up an impact on human trafficking, and you all are here in our virtual room today. Policymakers, activists, survivors, and airport officials are just to name a few. We are pleased that Liberia is taking steps to commit to the long-term planning and hands-on training at the local level that is required to combat trafficking. Only through local efforts to ensure prevention and accountability, combined with national government support for successful apprehension and prosecution of perpetrators, can we eliminate trafficking of persons and protect the most vulnerable Liberians. Over the past 20 years, nearly every country in the world has enacted laws to criminalize all forms of trafficking in persons, accompanied by nearly universal agreement on the importance of implementing policies and protocols to detect, investigate, and prosecute human trafficking cases and to assist survivors. This is all thanks in part to the landmark UN instrument. In the late 2000, member states of the United Nations adopted the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its supplementary protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. The Trafficking in Persons Protocol is significant for providing a 3Ps framework: preventing human trafficking, protecting survivors, and prosecuting the traffickers. It's also noteworthy for providing the first universally agreed upon definition of trafficking in persons. Today, this protocol enjoys near universal ratification with 178 states parties to the protocol. Liberia was notably one of the earliest countries to accede to this protocol in 2004, and they acceded to it even before the United States did. UNODC is the guardian of the Trafficking in Persons Protocol, and it manages the UN Voluntary Trust Fund for victims of trafficking in persons, which supports NGOs to provide direct assistance to 3,500 survivors each year from more than 40 countries. The optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the sale of children, the child prostitution and child pornography, is another relevant and important treaty. It criminalizes those acts. It provides minimum standards for protecting child victims in criminal justice processes. And it recognizes the right of survivors to seek compensation. The optional protocol enjoys also near universal ratification with 177 states parties, including the US. Liberia became a signatory to the instrument in 2004. However, it hasn't yet become a party. We have encouraged the government of Liberia to give serious consideration to acceding to the optional protocol as well. Today, we are focused on transborder and specifically transatlantic trafficking. But it's important to point out that human trafficking in Africa has the highest prevalence of any region in the world, according to the International Labor Organization. UNODC's 5th Global Report on Trafficking in Persons states that more than 75% of identified trafficking survivors in West Africa are children. 75%. Human trafficking does not require movement across borders, and often victims are exploited within their own countries. As reported by UNODC, 99% of survivors detected in sub-Saharan Africa are exploited within their own country or region. This is also true in Liberia. Secondary impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, including job losses, school closures, a rise in online activity, have increased vulnerability to trafficking, creating new opportunities for traffickers to exploit victims. Individuals who unexpectedly lose their jobs, children unable to attend school, and migrant workers are all increasingly vulnerable to exploitation. Meanwhile, enforcement has experienced mixed results in the wake of the pandemic. As reported by the U.S. Department of State's 2021 Trafficking in Persons report, Africa saw a significant decrease in trafficking convictions and numbers of survivors identified. However, there was an overall increase in trafficking prosecutions initiated, and more countries introduced new or amended anti-trafficking legislation. This could be a positive sign that countries are becoming more proactive and aggressive in their enforcement, but they do not yet have the training or the tools to build strong cases in certain contexts. UN Women estimates that women and girls may constitute up to 80% of the persons subjected to human trafficking globally. The same inequalities that underpin the crime of human trafficking also prevent women and girls from accessing protection and assistance. Female victims of human trafficking may be unwilling to come forward, as we've already heard, to the police due to a lack of gender sensitivity or knowledge of law enforcement agents. Many survivors are turned away and urged to seek mediation or other forms of settlement. Access to justice is further impeded by discriminatory laws and regulations. The engagement and empowerment of women can have a powerful effect in dismantling transnational criminal activity. Survivors of human trafficking require protection, assistance, and support, access to remedies, and safe return and reintegration into their communities with dignity and respect. Law enforcement agencies must be prepared and able to adequately provide survivors with the support and to work in border communities to mitigate the impact of these crimes. UN Women works at the grassroots level to raise awareness, to promote sustainable economic alternatives, and to provide linkages to services and paths to justice for women who have been or are at risk of human trafficking. UN Women also provides technical assistance and technical guidance and assistance to increase the capacity of frontline officers to meet the needs of women. Both UN Women and civil society organizations in the US support women's leadership and decision-making in policies and work to ensure laws at the local and national level integrate the perspectives of women and girls. In the US, law enforcement agencies and prosecutors protect survivors by adhering to constitutional mandates to protect the rights of survivors in 35 states, working with victim advocates and funding victim compensation funds through money seized from perpetrators. As economies reopen and travel and tourism resume, we must redouble our efforts to identify victims, hold traffickers accountable, and raise awareness. The 3Ps framework that I mentioned earlier, prevention of trafficking, protection of survivors, and prosecution of traffickers, each require effective coordination among local, state, and federal authorities. A 4th P, partnership, is equally important in combating human trafficking, and our hope is that events like this workshop will strengthen our mutual commitments to work together with the UN, Liberia, and other partners to combat human trafficking. Partnerships are crucial in cultivating relationships among government entities, civil society organizations, and the private sector to lead on anti-trafficking efforts through coordination and collaboration. Today, we're all hearing different perspectives from government, private sector, civil society, and survivors on how we can collectively deepen our awareness of trafficking and take concrete actions to address it. By training tourism and transportation workers, travelers, and community members, this workshop emphasizes the role individuals play in recognizing the signs of trafficking and then acting by effectively responding to or reporting the crime. It's incumbent upon all of us to stand together against human trafficking, both in Liberia and worldwide, for this is a truly transnational crime. And we are grateful for your participation and your partnership in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for your insightful comments. We are so excited to have you. You are such a leader in your space, and I know now why the UN Ambassador Greenfield referred us to you. You are outstanding, and your comments today are very well received, and we look forward to working with you as we further our work in Liberia. Having said that, I'd like to now turn it back over to Layli as we are getting ready to close out for the day. And she's going to give us highlights for tomorrow's workshop. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Thank you for your time and for your leadership today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Blanford, and also Ambassador Williams for that incredible overview from the UN perspective. I'm thankful to everybody for working our way through today, but of course we have tomorrow, and tomorrow's workshop builds on today's. We have another wonderful lineup of special guests and experts, and I wanted to let you know a little bit about it. I hope you'll be back at your respective starting time tomorrow, 8 a.m. if you're in the Eastern United States, 12 noon if you're in Liberia, and 1 p.m. if you're in Brussels. You can calculate your own time accordingly if you're somewhere else, because we will start bright and early with greetings from Vice President Jewel Howard-Taylor, who will share her perspective on the issue of countering trafficking in Liberia. We'll also have the opportunity to hear from Martin Hayes, who's the acting managing director of the Liberia Airport Authority, another very important guest. For our airline partner presentation tomorrow, we'll be hearing from Joeri Hendricks, who's head of security, crisis, and emergency response at SN Brussels. And so that will be another area where we'll have a great opportunity for conversation, questions and answers, and workshopping. That will be followed by a presentation by Deborah J. Richardson, who's the executive director of the ACLU Colorado, and also an anti-trafficking expert with years of experience having success on the ground. We'll also be hearing from Laura Newman, who's the director of Rule of Law programs at the Carter Center. And we'll be hearing from Professor Lenny Benson, who's a distinguished chair of human rights and immigration law at New York Law School. And we will close the day with remarks from Honorable George S.W. Patton Sr., the Liberian ambassador to the United States. We'll also share information about our own follow-up in the workshops that we'll be having in country in Liberia in early 2022. So don't miss it for tomorrow. Hopefully everyone got 2 calendar invites, one for today and one for tomorrow. If you didn't, please reach out in the chat and let ICON know so that you can be added to the list for tomorrow's notification. But much appreciation. I hope everyone learned something that you can take away. I hope that everyone's knowledge about how to understand and address trafficking is bigger and broader than it was before you entered today, no matter where you started. And I hope that your commitment to personally doing something from wherever you stand to make a difference is greater. So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your participation. Have a great day.